Yeah?
Wait till you hear that story.
Okay.
And they'll hear it at the same time you hear it. But I got to go call David. First, is David here in Skype? Yes, he is. So let's see if he's disciplined enough to say, hello, Your Eminence. I get criticized for not keeping a camera on myself. Yeah, I don't.
Hello, Your Eminence.
Hello, Your Effluence. And boy, guess what we have today?
We got a huge amount to cover.
And we have a huge amount of momentum, and we're stopping people from taking the DHS job. And we're probably going to get Ray Kelly of New York, James Comey of New York, I think his name is James, and Bob Paulson of Canada. We'll probably get them to shrink. And David, can I tell you something that's already in the chat room that you wouldn't believe if I didn't put it in the chat room so you could read it? Are you ready for something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Today's headline in New York City: the incredible shrinking wiener. Now, where do you think they got that, David? Over to you.
Well, they wouldn't have got it from me because I don't happen to fit that description, but they might have got it from you, Field.
Well, I think they did get it, and there is no me and you, there's us. So after I get the first noose and cigarette and bullet, you're up next. I hope you don't inhale. You know, Hillary Clinton, if she goes down before we do, I don't think she'll inhale. And I'm trying to find the chat room. But amongst all the other things, let me just say one thing before I give it over to you, because David, even though you're not on live stream, Pastor Clyde and I are sitting here enjoying a cup of coffee, and we're each going to have half of this seven-layer bar. But you hate it when I predict things or I forecast something. Let me unabashedly and with total humility predict that when chapter 22 goes up, it'll be the most powerful chapter we've ever written, and God is lining things up on our side. Yesterday, there was a 60-foot petition. That's 60 feet, F-E-E-T. A 60-foot petition was delivered to the United States government by special operations service personnel, retired, active, and the survivors of those who gave their lives in bogus operations, such as the snookered Chinook. That was yesterday. I jumped in the middle of that by posting our expose of the snookered Chinook. For those of you who have forgotten how you-know-who got rid of the SEALs that did not catch Osama bin Laden, he killed them all. He killed them in an Army CH-47 Chinook, and it was a violation of two policies. Number one, don't ever put the whole team on one aircraft. Split them onto three. Number two, never allow some flunkies to operate the aircraft. They have an entire squadron that is designated as the official helicopter transportation for special operations. And on that day in August of 2011, when some sniveling weasel needed to kill about 24 to 30 SEALs before any of them were to communicate back home and say, we didn't get Osama bin Laden, well, somebody needed to die. And I'm getting sort of sick of military personnel of the United States and every other country dying for a bunch of sniveling weasels. So David, yesterday, the 60-foot petition was signed. Today, a congressman has announced that he's going to open up an official investigation into the snookered Chinook. And if you don't think we're driving the cart, then you don't know much about horses. Over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Field. And it's very exciting because a little bit of technology crept into the mix here. And about 2 or 3 days ago, I was going through the background and something had escaped me of this guy, Jason McLean, who was Assistant Secretary to the Canadian Prime Minister's office from 2000 to 2002. And this is the term remote towers. And remote towers, if you look it up in Wikipedia, quite often it goes under the same name as the same phrase with virtual towers. And the idea of this is you can take an air traffic control function, which is normally in a fixed building, and actually put it into an E-4B night watch aircraft for 911, or you can put it in a remote-controlled caboose behind the locomotive at Lac-Mégantic, and use it to take control of the data flowing both ways through a crime scene. And this is particularly interesting if you're running a spread bet body counting fraud at that crime scene, because what you can do is you can put your remote tower or virtual tower alternately in communication with the red team if you want to raise the body count, or the blue team if you want to lower the body count. And then as the bookmaker to this scam, you can present to the betting public, or at least the insiders of the big pension funds, an opportunity to make a great deal of money or lose a great deal of money for the pension fund, or make a great deal of money or lose a great deal of money personally. So with the contract towers or the remote towers, of course, what that brings us back to is little Billy Clinton, the, what do you call it, the Peyronie's man, is that? I always forget the term that you use there, Phil.
Well, for the PhDs in the group, like our professor over in Kelso, Scotland, the proper term is Peyronie's syndrome. And what that is in a human male penis, there's two blood vessels or blood hydraulic devices that need to be engorged to make sure the deliverer of DNA-rich material gets into the target area. However, sometimes, yeah, and for the people who don't have PhDs, no laughing, David, this is serious business. Anyway, for people without PhDs, which means people at work, you might think of this adage, you can't push a rope. So anyway, Peyronie's syndrome is unfortunate for the person who has it, and I'm glad to say when last tested, I hadn't developed it yet, and I don't take delight in rubbing that in Hillary's face. But when you see the title,
I'm sure she wouldn't either.
No, I know she wouldn't like it either. And I'm looking at this headline out of New York City today. I just posted it, I think. Let me see if maybe I didn't. David, when I post this again, I want you to read this headline to me very clearly in the Queen's English, and tell me what this headline from a New York City paper today says. There it is. You might have to expand it.
Let me just open that up. And the incredible shrinking wiener. New York City mayor hopeful gets even skinnier. This is shudder-making, particularly when you think that his wife, Mrs. Wiener, is the bisexual, lesbian, erstwhile girlfriend of Hillary, and apparently she was winking and smiling while he was delivering his explanation that there's probably more pictures going to be coming of what his apparent pastime was, which I think the term is, but I'm not an expert in this, sexting. Over to you, Phil.
Yes, and sexting, I'm going to spell it, S-E-X-T-I-N-G, is different from sex sting, which is S-E-X, second word, S-T-I-N-G. But Huma Abedin Wiener, who is Hillary's bona vacantia, in other words, missing wiener, she's related to Egypt's and Saudi's Muslim Brotherhood. And I read a piece today where a well-known writer claimed that the legacy of Barry Soetoro, Punahou 79, is going to be that he made the Islamic Brotherhood vastly more powerful than they could have been without his ineptitude. So enough about Peyronie's syndrome, enough about Anthony Weiner's wiener. But David, did you know he's so proud of his shortcoming? And notice I didn't say twig and berries. He's so proud of his little Twiggy that he has been sending photos of Twiggy to a 22-year-old young lady. Did you know that, David?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's kind of appropriate that he should decide to run as the mayor of New York City, because his predecessor, Giuliani, I believe, was a cross-dresser. Now, I don't know when he was growing up or growing out whether he was sending images like that, but I'm quite sure that's part of the extortion racket that kept Giuliani quiet after 9/11. But if I may, let me go back to the remote towers. You see, because funnily enough, and it's always so amusing about human nature, everything is connected. Now, we can laugh at Bill Clinton's Peyronie syndrome, but he might have very well drawn a grudge that has lasted a lifetime from the moment that he recognized he had it, and probably that would have been fairly early when he took his first pee, but he wouldn't have known what the name was. He may very well have developed a grudge for the majority of American males who don't suffer from Peyronie's disease. And he may also have developed a grudge against the women who prefer, well, let's not go there, but let's keep going. What I'm trying to get at is I believe that Bill Clinton worked out, and he's too dumb to work it out himself, that a very good way of getting revenge on the straight shooters of the United States of America and the rest of the world is to launch man-in-the-middle attacks from a position of the Peyronie's syndrome. And I'm talking about the Serco contract towers. Now, Field, can you just quickly explain why the profile flown allegedly by Captain Chic Burlingham across the Pentagon lawn could not have been flown by a human being? Over to you.
Well, I think when it comes to being graced by God to have a 39-year career flying aircraft, some of them high-performance aircraft, and some of them transport category aircraft. Looking back on that 39-year career, I never could have done any of that stuff by myself, and I won't belabor the point. But if you were to talk to anybody who knew me when I flew for the Air National Guard or the Marine Corps, you would have heard some criticisms of my lack of preparation, as I never ever read an aircraft book from 1974. I read some of the book on the A4 Skyhawk. After that, I never read another airplane book, including when I flew the F4 Phantom for 13 years and the F-16 for 3 years at the end of my career. I never really liked the books. I sort of thought airplanes were like bicycles. Doesn't matter if it's a Columbia or a Schwinn or a Phillips. You hop on, you pump hard, and you hope the chain doesn't slip. And in 39 years of flying airplanes and letting the books gather dust, I never had an incident that caused the injury or death of anybody else on the ground or in my airplane. Having said that, if you got people from the Air National Guard or Marine to comment on my flying techniques, loose cannon or wild man would be some of the things you might hear. And that's simply because they were looking through their lenses and their paradigms, which means you have to prepare and you have to know all the numbers and all the procedures, and you have to fly within the rules. I don't know about you, David, but I think when it comes to defending your homeland, and that's a Nazi term, by the way, but if as a little Air Force first lieutenant flying an F4 in 1977, I was scrambled to go north of Winnipeg 800 miles at night with a single airplane because the other guy either didn't want to fly because it was too cold or he dummied up an excuse because he was a coward. Both could happen. Neither generally happened, but it is possible, and I've been there, where they try to scramble both the aircraft off alert, and one guy gets out by himself. Well, it never happened to me that I had to shoot somebody by myself, but I was in that position for 16 years, and I'm going to ask you, as a citizen of Canada and a former citizen of the UK, if you thought that the Canadian Forces or the Royal Air Force could not protect you simply because they wanted to follow so many rules that were burdensome, would you prefer that type of military defense, or would you rest easier knowing that some troublemaker, loose cannon or wild man was out there whose policy was ready, fire, aim? And the beauty of ready, fire, aim is it puts a missile in the air And now back to the scenario where it's 800 miles north of Winnipeg in the wee hours. That missile rocket motor, when it fires, it's a brilliant orange glow. And regardless of who is out there, whether it's an airliner with no radios that's innocent, they're going to see it and they will react to it and they'll be terrified. They won't be threatened because you can break lock on the radar and cause the missile to go, that's called go stupid or become a sand seeker. And that's easily done. For instance, with my hands now, my hands in my mouth, I'll say Fox 1. Watch this. Fox 1. And then after we get the orange glow, and it's only a very brief glow, and in the case of an AIM-7 Sparrow missile, which is a radar-guided missile, it'll burn for probably a second or two. Jack Mac's going to find out and post the answer. The burn time on an AIM-7M Sparrow, let's say it burns for 2 seconds, and that 2 seconds is going to go from launch velocity, and I'd be going about 500 knots. It'll go Mach 2 above launch velocity, so it'd be going Mach 2.8 a couple seconds after I pull the trigger. And then it would go black because the rocket propulsion would have been consumed. And then the rest of the time that the missile's on a tracking solution guided by radar returns, it's going to be constantly decelerating right up until it gets to the CPA. What's a CPA? Closest point of approach. Another way of saying that is when the V sub C goes to 0. Now for our professor over at Kelso, Scotland, he probably thinks I'm talking in code. I'm not. V sub C is closing velocity. I'm going to show you. Here's a missile going 2.8. Here's an airliner going 0.8. They're aiming at each other. They got an overtake, a V sub C, closing velocity of Mach 3.6. Okay? When the V sub C goes to 0, that's the point of closest point of approach, and it's going to go to 0, and as soon as it hits 0, the missile warhead's going to go, and there's going to be constantly continuous expanding rods that slice through everything, just like TWA 800's nose. Hint, hint. But the idea is, if the missile does not get a direct hit, which they generally don't with AIM-7 Sparrows, I think their percentage of kill, and keep in mind they don't have to hit it to kill it, but the percentage of kill is probably less than 0.7 for an old Sparrow. So now I've forgotten your question, but the answer, in fact, why don't you go ahead and pose the question again, real briefly, and then I'll finish this up real briefly.
Yeah, the question was, why couldn't that profile have been flown by a human being across the Pentagon lawn?
Because it overstressed a transport category aircraft. What I mean by that, any transport category aircraft out there typically is stressed from -1 G to +2.5 Gs. And in order to do an Immelman or a split S or a slice back, any of those things require 4 Gs or 4 Gs plus, depending on the airspeed. And a 757 can't pull 4 Gs very long. The reason I say very long, it'll run out of energy or the wings will come off, or both. Could that profile be flown? If anybody wants to find out for sure, all they have to do is pay to put me in a simulator, any kind of a simulator, because all bicycles are the same, whether it's a Schwinn, a Phillips, or a Columbia, and you just have to hope the chain doesn't slip. But I once made that challenge to John Lear, the son of the guy who invented Learjets, and Jim Fetzer, who's the guy that used to be at the University of Minnesota Duluth, that can't talk about certain subjects or his college retirement might be imperiled. But you know, if people who are informed and have this information and have the articulation skills to promote it so that everybody can understand it, if we collectively do not speak, everyone in the world is imperiled. And out of the 7 billion people in the world, there's not a whole lot of people that can understand this and talk about it. But I'll very humbly suggest there's nobody in the U.S. government that wants to talk to me about it with a camera running. So, David, what was reported by the Murdoch media, actually I left a syllable out, Murderock. The Murderock media in the United States and Western Europe tried to convince us that some 19 to 23-year-old young men that had never flown anything that had jet engines above 10,000 feet. Every simulator profile they flew was below 10,000 feet. That tells you they hadn't flown more than 250 knots. And the mainstream media tells you that whatever hit the Pentagon was going 500 to 550, 15 feet above the ground. Some people say that's impossible. Well, those some people that say that's impossible for a jet airplane to be flying 500 to 550 above the ground need to see the videotape of me flying 690, 10 feet above the ground. Is that a boast? Nope. In fact, that was a violation too. Some would say that's poor judgment to be in front of a crowd of 11,000 people on a bright July day in Bozeman, Montana, going 690 miles per hour at 10 feet. But you know, those same people that might say that was stupid are the same people that might be glad that that videotape exists to add credibility to the person answering your question. David, the profile at the Pentagon, the descent from 7,000 to 15 feet, 270-degree right turn, which is called a slice back, could not be performed in a transport category aircraft. And I will pony up my 18,000 hours of transport category flying to anybody who wants to argue that in front of a neutral moderator with several cameras going, and none of the tape will be edited. I don't think anybody wants to talk with those caveats. Did I answer your question, David?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. So the fact that something we assume flew across the Pentagon lawn at that speed and that degree of precision, and remember, from America's point of view, perhaps one of the most important strategic target in the United States military would be the U.S. Navy Command Center in the Pentagon. And whatever it was that went across the Pentagon lawn went through the first floor window, behind which was the duty officer, Captain Gerald DeConto, for the U.S. Navy Command Center. And although it's not quite appropriate in terms of scale, the missile, or whatever it was, would have hit him between the eyes. Well, that's pretty sharp shooting. So I've just put up a picture of the technology that I think we can now safely claim was absolutely necessary field, and I think you should add this to your Stranglers suite. And I believe it's up to about 10 or 12, but this may be the most important technology. And essentially, if you Google remote towers and look at images, this is one of the images that pops up, and this is a Saab remote control tower, or remote tower, or a virtual tower. So the signal is being transmitted from a physical tower using cameras and infrared and various other devices to measure the 5 dimensions of the incoming, three physical dimensions of location, and then speed and azimuth, which gives you velocity. So you can land a plane in the vicinity of the Pentagon and drive it as a missile through the first floor window of the US Navy Command Center with a remote tower. And the remote tower could be miniaturized. It could actually be in an E-4B flying overhead. And essentially, field, we're talking about a man-in-the-middle attack. Now, for a man-in-the-middle attack to be successful on the Pentagon, you need to be able to get into the network time protocols used by the Pentagon to defend itself against such an attack. And the network time protocols for the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center were historically installed through equipment provided by Sun Microsystems, Access Graphics, sub-company under the Lockheed Martin label. And back in 1996, Access Graphics CEO, Chief Executive Officer, was one JonBenet Ramsey. So things are coming into place very nicely. Essentially what your sister and Hillary Clinton did in 1994, they prevailed upon the Peronis man to privatize a chunk of the FAA service under the label or rubric contract towers.
That's my sister.
So Serco, I believe, field picked up about 60 contract towers around the United States of America and began operating them on behalf of the FAA. Contract towers is an interesting expression because you could read it as contract hit towers. That is, these are towers that will subsequently be used to arrange crashes of aircraft and monitor the red team and the blue team going into the crash scene to make sure that the crime scene investigation is disrupted and diverted, so they focus instead on collecting the body bits, bleaching the evidence of the body bits, putting them in little plastic bags, and returning them to the loved ones of the lost ones, if you will, with a label or the implication, look what a great job we're doing as your government. We're terribly sorry about the tragedy. They always call it a tragedy, Phil. Of course, it's not a tragedy, it's a crime. And they measure their success in the speed and precision with which they restore the body bits to the lost ones' families. And that process, I think, started at the pig farm in British Columbia. Somewhere near the pig farm, and some people say that the first killings took place in around the late 70s. Somewhere near the pig farm, we're going to find a tower, a radio tower, which monitors communications between the RCMP, whose brief extended to Port Coquitlam, where the pig farm was, the Vancouver Police Department, whose brief extended to the downtown east side, where the women victims were selected to be tortured and killed in front of the cameras out at the pig farm, and then their body bits either fed to people attending the cannibal feasts, or the food chain, or the pigs that lived out there. So essentially what you had at the pig farm was a research and development center for the perfect man-in-the-middle crime, where the evildoers would monitor communications between the RCMP and the Vancouver police, which obviously creates a territorial challenge because the brief of the RCMP does not normally extend into Vancouver, and the brief of the Vancouver police does not normally extend out to where the RCMP operates. The common element here, and this amazingly enough relates to Michelle Obama's trip to Washington in 1991, is that both parties would ordinarily expect to be able to call the 911 service and have people dispatched to the scene, the crime scene, to start working on securing the evidence and solving the crime. So back in 1979, McDonnell Detweiler in British Columbia was given a contract to build a mobile radio system to link the Vancouver police to the RCMP to the 911 service, and they therefore set up a potential opportunity for sophisticated man-in-the-middle attacks on those communication systems where no crime managed through these remote towers, which would have to be built to intercept the communications, would be solved. So effectively it would be exactly what King Ethelred the Unready was talking about as a precursor to the grand jury. Shelter no guilty, accuse no innocent.
Hey, David, mind
Yes.
if I fire hose you?
Please.
According to my command of English history, Ethelred the Unready, I think he said that in about 1066, but it doesn't matter because my great-great-grandfather, 17 times removed, Chips McElroy the Turgid, in 1200 stated that sometimes royals have babies and sometimes they fake having babies, and I'm not referring to George Alexander Lewis, but I just wanted to break in here and tell you something so you can rest, and I promise to take you back to 1979 and privatize towers, and I also want you to see if you can remember the name and significance of Willie Card. But for those of you on live stream, you clearly see that I'm wearing Craig's purple hat, which I was also wearing in that photo, which I hope someone puts up right now. But Craig, don't worry, I'm not getting my cooties on your hat. I'm using a protective layer. That's different than a protective liar, like Tony Blair or whoever that guy was. I want to tell you guys a brief story. We have a new agent here at Abel Danger who's a blonde woman from Greece. Her name in real life is Plomara Uzo, as you can clearly see here. And Plomara Uzo also goes by the Abel Danger agent name Skinny Dipper. She is a practitioner of diversity training. Wait till you see the picture. You'll have to wait for chapter 22. By the way, chapter 22 could be up late tonight if I hurry, or tomorrow if I relax and go for a tiptoe through the tulips. David, you're not looking at this, but everybody else is. This is a bottle of Ouzo. It's Greek liqueur. I hate driving, but yesterday some member of my family needed surgery, so you can't drive after surgery or you'll be accused of driving like a politician, looped. So I went to a Greek restaurant I didn't know about. I drove around Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And by the way, for Craig and other people that like to micromanage numbers, and that's a compliment, 422 Water Street, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and 344 Water Street, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Neither one of those were visited by me. I went to a fast food place, and as I got out of the green Lincoln that Atomic Betty and Agent Bean had all weekend, I was facing a strip mall across the street, and I saw Olympic Flame. And at this point, oh, great picture. Oh, that's a great picture, Craig. Thank you. That's my doppelganger. People think it looks like me just because it's my car, which reminds me, I didn't drive the car. The only guy that drove that car all weekend was Hammer McCheese, and in my mind, anytime he's in Plum City, that's his car. And if he breaks it, it's insured, and if he doesn't break it, it'll probably be better for his care and explanation. Yeah, there you go. That was fast. Craig just put up the House of Rock at 422 Water Street. I was having lunch with a guy from the House of Rock, and at the end of his lunch, I had spinach and cheese pie with a small hero. And I'm not talking about Anthony Weiner. He's a small anti-hero. But anyway, when I was having my lunch, which was delightful, and next, if we ever have another Plum City plunge and people come one day early or stay one day late, I have the transportation assets to get as many as 27 people up to the Olympic Flame, but I don't think that type of a group would be unwieldy and out of control. So I don't think that'll ever happen. But after lunch, the guy from the House of Rock ordered an Ouzo, and he probably thought that I was so old I wouldn't know what Ouzo is. Actually, I didn't know what it was, but my doppelganger was up there having lunch. And I started talking to the owner of the restaurant about how good his food was, specifically spinach and cheese pie. It was out of this world, and I've had it elsewhere. And he very humbly said, he's a man about 55, I'm guessing. Maybe he's younger. He's got a 21-year-old daughter who was sitting right next to me, whose name's Athena. See if that rings a bell to any of you. Athena. Where have you heard that name before? That's what I said. So I called my cousin, Athena, and said, cousin, guess who I'm sitting next to? And I passed the phone over to Athena the Greek. But anyway, I said to the owner of the restaurant, your food's very good, and I have a question for you, but I feel uncomfortable saying it in front of my daughter, in front of your daughter. And he said, oh no, my daughter's 21, she can handle it. What's your question? I said, have you ever heard of the island in Greece called Lesbos Island? He said, as a matter of fact, I was stationed on Lesbos Island for 3 years at the end of my duty with the Greek army. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, because there's some people in this country that probably would like to be on that island if they could avoid going to prison or to the gallows. But then a second time Lesbos Island came up was when the guy from 422 Water Street ordered an Ouzo on ice. And the guy who was the bartender, which is also the guy who's the waiter, because it's a small operation, and it's in chapter 22. He says, "Have you ever?" No, he had just poured the guy some ouzo, and he said, "Would you like some?" And I said, "Not after the comment I just heard from you guys that some people have 2 shots of ouzo and they end up in the emergency room." I said, "I've already got 1 person in the emergency room, so I think I'll skip the ouzo." And the owner said, "Well, if you ever want ouzo, make sure you come to us because we're the best Greek restaurant in Eau Claire. And this is ouzo from Lesbos Island. Now, is it legally imported, or maybe it's imported some other way? I don't know. I don't care. Have I tried any? Does that look sealed to you, Pastor Hole? Yep. No, this is sealed, and this thing is going to remain sealed until the next time we have a Plum City victory party, whether it is in Wisconsin or Texas. And I think we may have to have a victory party here sometime around the 22nd of October of this year, because I'm not so sure Hillary and Obama are going to be able to shut down the Benghazi investigation now that it's been expanded to include not only Benghazi, but the snookered Chinook. And this is going to sound boastful, but if I'm boasting, I'm just boasting of God and to a vastly lesser degree, David Hawkins. There's no entity in the world that has put out the volume of accurate information on snookered Chinook and Benghazi that we've done. And David, I'm going to turn it over to you as soon as I point out to Craig Peterson that I'm going to put your hat on your shoes and your costumes are there. And on Friday's shows, I'll have your shirt down here. It's currently with well, you guys saw that picture. The picture of my doppelganger who looks exactly like me, but he dresses like he's from out of the 70s. His name is Johnson Shaft, and he is the Caucasian equivalent of Isaac Hayes' bad shaft. But this is a good shaft. And if you know what a Johnson is, it's not anything to do with the New York mayor's candidate's shortcoming. David, over to you.
Well, thanks, Field. So just going back to the remote towers, to all intents and purposes, the launch of the attack of 911, I believe we can date it back to 1994 when Hillary Clinton and your sister's senior executive service decided if they could privatize a chunk of the Federal Aviation Administration and set up a network or a matrix, if you will, of privately owned contract towers, and provided they controlled the company that operated those towers, then they could operate or set up a man-in-the-middle attack, perhaps it's more accurate to say a woman-in-the-middle attack, on the United States of America, that we look back and we realize that's what happened on 911, because these remote or contract towers operated by Serco would have had the capability, given that Serco operated the National Physical Laboratory clock, the cesium clock, in Teddington and Middlesex in the UK, to hack into the communications of the various teams that were responding to crashes or the attack of 911 and disrupt them or facilitate them. So with the idea of betting on a body count or a spread bet, let me just, and I'm thinking on the fly here, Field, so jump in if I don't express myself very well. But let's say hypothetically, the Octopus, the Haig's Octopus, decides to impress the people of New York, and in particular the unions representing the the Fire Department of New York and the New York Police Department. They wanted between 300 and 400 firefighters to die on 911. And broad brush, they knew that they basically had to get them inside the Twin Towers and pull the towers down around their ears to kill realistically that kind of number, and make sure that the evidence was so disrupted and contaminated they would lower the chance of a successful crime scene investigation. So now on the pay-to-pay principle, they would go to the largest accumulation of capital the world has ever seen, which is the carbon disclosure project in the UK, launched out of number 10 Downing Street by Sherry Blair on the 4th of December of 2000. And that accumulation of capital now represents pooled funds of around $90 trillion. It would go to the various pension funds, including the New York City Employees Retirement System, and say, you're now, folks, waking up to the real world of organized crime. You're in a pay-to-play situation. We, that is the bookmaker, are going to arrange to place your pension funds on either side of the spread. We're talking about the body count of between 300 and 400 dead firefighters in the Twin Towers. So you've got no choice. If you don't bet, then you're going to be cut out of this pay-to-pay process, and you'll never get inside information that will protect your pension fund in the future. But you do have the choice as to which side of the spread you want to go. So let's take a pension fund such as the Teachers' Pension Fund in the United States, which pays the pension fund of such revolutionaries and socialists as Bill and Hillary Clinton and Bernardine Dawn and Barack Obama. And the teachers, that's TIAA CREF, College Retirement Equity Fund, is now the world's largest private pension fund, I believe around $500 billion, which is obviously a lot of clout to put in the hands of useful idiots like Barack Obama. So that kind of pension fund and its management would probably be very happy to go over the spread. And I think the term is over and under betting. So if the spread is, let's say, 350 plus or minus 50, so that's 400 to 300, the teachers could easily be persuaded to go for over 400. I'm going to come to a variation, and this is where I'm guessing, but I'd like people's reaction to it. So let's say the teachers go for over 400, and the New York Fire Department pension fund goes for under 300. That is to say, the teachers want more dead firefighters, and of course the firefighters want as few as possible. So let's say, as a first blush or a first analysis, the teachers would try to get as many casualties as they could, and the firefighters would try and get as few. But let's add a little twist here. Let's say the teachers were told, well, we want you to bet over 300, and the firefighters to bet under 400. You've then got an overlap between the spread where the majority of legitimate people inside the teachers' union and the firefighters' union may think they're doing something useful, but the bookmaker, because they've got inside information through the remote towers, know that they can hack into the communication systems used by the firefighters, officers, to deploy men. I presume they were predominantly men because of their body strength, to go into the Twin Towers and trap them. But the officers would have a very precise idea of how many men they'd sent into the towers. And my guess is anyone in those towers, and remember I think they dropped in about 10 seconds. No one inside the elevator systems or the stairwells of the Twin Towers would have survived once the demolition started. So I visualize field with the remote towers that the data is being fed into an international spread betting network with an option for what is known as spot fixing. So the big punters would have been betting on accepting that both towers were going to come down and a lot of firefighters were going to die, but the insiders actually doing the sabotage and pushing the button through the remote towers to demolish the towers would have had an opportunity to do what's called spot fixing. And with inside information, my guess is they might have said, this is the bookmaker, the Haig's Octopus, to the people pushing the buttons, we will offer you $100 million for each unit of dead firefighter above 340 dead firefighters, which would have meant that the 3 extra firefighters above 340 would have been worth $300 million to the hit teams pushing the buttons through the remote towers. Now, have I lost you, Field, or have I lost the audience, or does that make sense? Over to you.
No, but let me just welcome a new participant and a person who may well become a character. We have a PhD from Scotland on live stream. I do not believe that the PhD from Scotland, and apparently he enjoys being open with his name, just like you and I do, David Hawkins and Field McConnell. And the professor's name is George Lees, L-E-E-S. And I have suggested to George Lees that if he becomes a chat room participant, that he might consider, since he's a professor, being Professor Plum. But he's already responded to that, saying that he'll sample the radio show today, and if he likes it, or if he thinks there's any worthy information being emitted, he may be back, and he's already got the keys to the chat room if he wishes to join. Anybody that wishes to get access to our chat room, and we are monitored only by ourselves, and we've never had anybody kicked out of the chat room. I don't even know how to kick people out of the chat room, and I own the chat room. So if anybody ever gets kicked out of the chat room, I can tell you who it isn't, me, because I'm technologically challenged, and I wouldn't have any idea how to do that. However, we do have some guidelines. We like to try to keep the useless images, like all those emoticons or whatever they're called. That really takes up a lot of bandwidth. But as far as people coming in and expressing their thoughts, that's great. But we like to stay on topic. And we do not go down rabbit holes, but just to show you that we're aware of rabbit holes, let me give you some of the lyrics from White Rabbit. One pill makes you bigger and one pill makes you small. The pill your mother gives you don't do anything at all. Just ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. And the White Knight is talking backwards and the Queen is seeing red. Well, the White Knight is one of our agents, and I'm talking frontwards. George, the professor, and this is not a criticism, George, welcome aboard. He is a little bit initially confused, like everyone else, about all the acronyms and what he would call coded and flippant chatter, and chatter is not his word, the other was. But that's assumed, George. Is it George? Yes, it is. Professor George Lees. Yeah. Most people at first are confused by it, and it doesn't take long to spin up. And we've got a lot of people in the chat room who can tell you that they laid in the weeds or sat in the weeds for sometimes 4 years before they popped up and made themselves evident. One of each gender that I can recall having told me that. Our agent Beanspiller is a female in Missouri. I think she sat on the sidelines for a while, maybe a year or two, before she felt comfortable participating. And our Hammer McCheese, and of course what a hammer is somebody that's an on-scene commander, and you can have a global hammer, a Pacific hammer, a domestic hammer, and Hammer McCheese is the fellow that was up driving the 40 Studebaker, the blue one, around all weekend. He wouldn't let me drive it, but he has told me that if he comes next time, that he will share it with my 19-year-old daughter. And that's good because I haven't been able to teach my 19-year-old daughter how to burn rubber efficiently without getting a ticket. And maybe he can. Sometimes it's hard to learn from your own parents because you think they're judging you too harshly. If my 19-year-old daughter could learn to leave a 90-foot strip of black rubber right in front of Molly's, I'd be the proudest dad in the whole USA. Not to be confused with Donna Fargo, who said this, "Zippity-doo-dah, I love you." That's from Happiest Girl in the Whole USA, which sounded sort of like this. I'm the happiest girl in the whole USA. Zippity-doo-dah, I love you, for blah, blah, blah. Enough about songs and enough about flippancy, but everybody in the chat room, if you ever see somebody show up from Kelso, Scotland, named Professor George Lees, he is trying to help us get exponential growth in the next 90 days as opposed to binary growth. And I think it's going to happen not because of what George does or what David and I do. I think the fear of God is squarely in the hearts of these evildoers, and they're starting to look over their shoulder and try to figure out who the middle-aged leakers are. Let me make it real easy for our friends at DHS. Here's a middle-aged leaker. You like it so far? Grab your ankles. There's plenty more where that came from. And chapter 22 will either be up tonight or tomorrow night, and I'm not putting pressure on myself, so I'm going to say tomorrow night, although it could come up tonight late if you know who in Phoenix says it's okay. But when that chapter comes up, there's no doubt in my mind it's going to be our most accurate, lethal, and well-read chapter ever, and that's in 11 books, which would be around 275 chapters. So David, you were talking about 1979, 1974, Willie Card and privatized towers. If you're going to talk about privatized towers, and you mentioned Willie Card's untimely death, it might be worth noting who was in the funeral to make sure that Willie Card was dead. David, over to you.
Yeah, I don't remember their names, but the senior people from Serco, United States of America, were at the funeral. And I always like that term, unexpected death, because that implies to me someone expected it, but they're assuming or hoping that for the rest of us, the conclusion is it was unexpected. But I think that was a planned death, because obviously he knew a great deal about the possibility of subverting or converting the use of contract towers into remote towers for the 911 attack. And what I was explaining, or at least what I was asking Field as I finished my last diatribe, was when I explained the idea of spread betting, where one pension fund would be given an opportunity in terms of body count to go over the spread laid out by the bookmaker, and another pension fund would be given the opportunity to go under the spread, you create a very dangerous dynamic where, in a sense, the pension fund trustees, and they can be the BBC Pension Trust trustees, or they could be the CalPERS, California Public Employees Retirement System, or possibly, and incidentally, welcome George, the superannuation fund for universities in the United Kingdom, where unwitting faculty members have their future benefits when they retire being gamed, fascinatingly enough, by companies like Serco. So how can Serco participate or contribute to this spread betting, spot fixing fraud where the payouts are based on body count, or the distance between the body count and the spot? Well, let me just, for George's sake, let me put up a little bit more about Serco that he might not be aware of. HMP Her Majesty's Prison Kilmarnock. Serco has operated HMP Kilmarnock since 1999 under a 25-year contract on behalf of the Scottish Prison Service. It is one of the most modern prisons in Scotland, specifically designed for efficiency, with 500 single cells and a maximum capacity of 692 prisoners. HMP Kilmarnock is a closed, high-security establishment accommodating remand, short-term and long-term male adult prisoners and male young offender remands, operated by Serco HMP Kilmarnock. And it's just gone off the screen because that's what this chat room does. Is part of the Scottish Prison Service estate, and prisoners remain under the same care agenda as that of the Scottish Prison Service. Now, George, I went to a British boarding school, nice school in Canterbury, Methodist boarding school, and I imagine the mix of homosexuals to straight people is about the same as in standard institutions where there's boarding. But I would predict that in a high security jail, whether it's for men or for women, the level of interest in homosexual sex would be extraordinary. And as we know with the Cray twins, when they were jailed for life starting 1969, there's an extraordinary latitude given to prisoners who, through whatever reason, are able to extort concessions from their wardens. And the Cray's speciality was pedophile entrapment. And as I understand it, the Cray twins, and I think this is where Serco got the idea, the Cray twins operated a pedophile bodyguard service called Crayley Enterprises from behind bars. And in 1988, when Frank Sinatra came to visit Wimbledon, the Crays provided him with 19 bodyguards. And the prediction I would make is that whatever sexually turned on or turned Frank Sinatra's crank, if it was children, he got it. But every encounter he might have had with the child would have been recorded on video or film and squirreled away for the future purposes, including the extortion of Hollywood, to make films that the conspirators felt promoted their cause. So going back to Serco, most extraordinary things have been delivered into Serco's lap, probably as a result of contributing a critical service in this pedophile entrapment and pedophile extortion racket. One is in 1994, Bill and Hillary Clinton gave them the opportunity to operate 40 to 60, I believe, contract towers in the United States of America, which are effectively, with a little bit of technology transfer from British Columbia, remote or virtual towers that would be essential to support a man-in-the-middle attack on the United States of America on 911 by hacking into what Field calls the Strangler's Suite, and I'm going to rest my voice in a minute. I don't want you to give the whole list there, Field, because probably it's getting as challenging to your memory as mine, but could you just quickly summarize the Strangler's suite of weapons that would ordinarily have been in the hijacked aircraft to pull off the stunts and profiles as they did? Over to you.
Oh, sure. It's no problem for me. Every time you get tired or get bored, I have to take over and leap into my swan dive of death, exposing information such as not only the Strangler Suite, but as you'll clearly recall, David, on the 28th of August of 2009, it was announced that Serco is part of the CIA Wackenhut global empire, along with Bobby Ray Inman and former Defense Secretary and Deputy CIA Director Frank Carlucci. I've put up a link in the chat room, which you can fall asleep to later. But I think, Frank, you have sometimes said that Frank Carlucci and those other dolts, oh, that's rather unfair. It's an unkind statement to put Frank Carlucci and dolt in the same sentence because dolts everywhere are now offended. I'm sorry about that. Frank Carlucci and his twin sisters, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, those three, I can't think of a nice word, so I'll just say those three. You thought David had been entrapped by my sister. I think in chapter 22, I'm going to suggest that Frank Carlucci is the master entrapper and let him and my sister fight it out as to see who's entrapped who, knowing all the while that Thomas J. Smollett, the senior Jesuit in the United States of America, sits atop both of them. In other words, if Carlucci and my sister want to arm wrestle, well, he better work out if he's going to wrestle with my sister. She's a heavy. But anyway, if my sister and Frank Carlucci want to have a hissy fit about who's in charge, it doesn't matter because both of those hissy fit people work under the strict goose-stepping guidelines of Thomas J. Smollett, senior Jesuit in America. Strangely enough, he hangs his hat at Georgetown University, and it's by no coincidence that that stairway used in the movie. I'm trying to think. Craig Peterson, what was that movie when Linda Blair spun her head around? It's about being, what's that called when a spirit indwells you? Yeah, possessed. But there was a movie in 1974 where Linda Blair spun her head around 360 degrees and then projectile vomited something green. Watch this. What's the name of that movie, folks? Somebody's got the name of that movie I'm trying to recall. And David, I'll get to your thing as soon as I get the name of the... I've seen that movie about twice. The Exorcist. Thank you. You know what the problem was there? It's not that I can't remember, but I'm talking about extortion. And my Mark 1 Mod 3 thinker was getting extortion and exorcist a little bit too tight for pleasure. No, I didn't say tight and pleasure in the same sentence, so obviously somebody's doctoring these films again. You ask about the Strangler Suite. Frank Carlucci, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Hillary Clinton, and Chris, notice I didn't say Christine Marcy, the new sister, Chris Marcy, as opposed to little sister, which is my 19-year-old daughter who has just been given free rubber burning lessons. In other words, next time Jack Mac is up here, he calls her little sis, and she has great respect for him, as do I, and everyone else at Abel Danger. And I'm not sucking up to Jack Mac because the two question marks going into the Plum City weekend were Jack Mac on the male side and redacted on the female side. And Jack Mac not only passed with flying colors, but he is way beyond an asset for Abel Danger, not just for Abel Danger stuff, but for the fun stuff like burning rubber up and down Main Street in Plum City. And there were 140 cars in the car parade on Friday, the 19th of July, here in Plum City. And the only two that were reported to have been burning rubber was well, it's redacted as to who owns it, who is driving it, but it was a 1930 Studebaker with a Chevy 427, and it is alleged that a 1940 Studebaker with a Mopar Max Wedge 413 was also burning rubber. I know in the case of the 36 Studebaker, each rubber burnout was preceded by the warning that my clutch is sticky. Of course, nobody knew that was an automatic, nor do they need to know that kind of stuff, because I don't want to be a man with loose lips and get somebody in trouble like Frank Carlucci, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Chris Marcy, and who am I forgetting? Oh yes, Hillary Clinton, Thunder Thighs. So Thunder Thighs, my sister, Queen Hornet, and Carlucci, Rumsfeld, and the other one, they're so easy to forget, Dick Cheney. They were well aware, long before the morning of 9/11, that the Strangler Suite of these 6 illegal modifications to aircraft existed. The Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, which was deployed no later than 1995 by Boeing, once triggered remotely, normal control of the aircraft could not go back to the crew in the aircraft, so they might as well just go back to first class and start pounding down martinis with 2-step queens, because they're not going to be responsible for anything anyway. So whoever's doing the technological remote flying is responsible for the safety of the aircraft after they take it. Who would that be? I will tell you in chapter 22. So we got the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. Here comes Hillary Clinton because she ripped off the intellectual property from BEI, Bravo Echo India Corporation of Little Rock. BEI produced the QRS, that's Quebec Romeo Sierra 11, QRS 11 solid state triaxial gyroscope. Those things were designed to be in the seeker head or near the seeker head of the AGM-65 Maverick missiles, supersonic missile from Raytheon Corporation, which was not only is Raytheon currently one of the biggest defense contractors, but they were the most obvious defense contractor participators in the treasonous act of 9/11. And strangely enough, the longtime director of Raytheon was a guy named Cheney, and he looks just like Dick Cheney. And apparently they're not related, but you know, when people look alike and they got the same name, it makes you wonder if maybe the neighbor was doing some chores while the old man was away, which reminds me of the song by Merle Haggard, "The Old Man from the Mountains Coming Home. I thought I ought to call you so you'd be there all alone. Get rid of friendly Henry." Anyway, enough about Merle and enough about cheating songs. I think it's sort of cheating to use the United... What's that?
Get rid of Joe the Grinder.
Okay. Joe the Grinder. I can do a lot with that. That was from notice I didn't say 83-year-old because he had a birthday just before the Plum City Plunge. Get rid of Joe the Grinder. He better be home alone because the old man from the mountains coming home. Anyway, enough about the songs. We got the QRS-11 gyro chip. Why does a Boeing 757 that's limited to 0.84, 0.86 Mach need a gyroscope capable of supersonic flight? Well, maybe it needs that briefly so that it burns up completely when an overpressure in the pressurized cabin blows the empennage off and the rest of the aircraft rockets ahead furiously as the expanding gas, and I don't know anything about Bernoulli's theorem, but I do know about Peroni's syndrome, and somewhere between Bernoulli and Peroni, the tail end of United 93 came off and burned everything up. Well, not everything, but most things. So QRS-11 gyroscope is number 2. Number 3 is SMAC-sonic insulation. It is thermal, oral, and vibrational insulation, trilaminar. It's got a white coat, a black coat, and a white coat, sort of like the mental hospitals that might be treating Barry Swatero 79 if he goes nuts. There'll be somebody in a white coat and a black coat, and, well, probably a brown coat. Who knows what they'll be wearing. But the white coats are coming, Barry boys, so get your ankles ready. What I was saying about the KU band was the KU band communications detonate the SMAC-sonic trilaminar insulation, which is really not insulation at all, although it acts exactly like insulation. It looks exactly like insulation. However, when the KU band detonators are signaled by the on-scene commander for the bad team, the two little white things are shorted out electronically, causing the black stuff, which is rocket fuel, to ignite. And for George Lease over in Kelso, Scotland, the temperature on the surface of the moon, 93 million miles from Kelso, is reported to be 11,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature when SMAC-sonic is detonated in 1 second goes from the ambient temperature of a transport category aircraft with people in it, which would typically be 73 to 74. 1 second later, it'll be 5,800. 5,800 is 1/2 the temperature of the sun at the surface of the sun. And I don't know what you teach, Professor George Lees, but if it's things like physics, astrophysics, or those types of things, you might know that at 5,800 degrees, everything in this room is going to be turned to plasma, and plasma, the lowest reducible form of matter. It'll turn this to plasma. It'll turn that couch to plasma. It'll turn Craig Peterson's purple hat to plasma, his shoes underneath the hat. See that Ouzo Plumera bottle? That would go to plasma, and there'd be a lot of weeping people in Greece if they thought a perfectly good bottle of Lesbos Island Ouzo just got vaporized. But one thing that Rudy Giuliani and the rest of these cretins didn't understand, and I'm going to give you a hint, so anybody in the chat room who gets this hint, try to be the first one to tell the rest of the people in the chat room what part of the passengers that got burned up in a SMAC-sonic fire at 5,800 degrees, what part of the passengers would tell the tale? Okay, somebody got the hint, and it's not mouth. Let's rule that out. Okay, so we did the KU, we did the SMAC-sonic, we did the QRS-11, we did the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. So that leaves only the 2 F words. So if anybody's offended by F words, please go out and have a sandwich and come back in about 20 light years. F word number 1 is FBCA. That's Federal Bridge Certification Authority. That is effectively the keys to turn on the 9/11 killing machine. And amongst the other people that had it, the British Ministry of Defense. Why does the British Ministry of Defense have the keys of the FBCA, which is a U.S. deal? Gee, I don't know. I'm not a college professor. I can't explain it to everybody. How about Wells Fargo? What are they doing with the keys to 9/11? And how is it that Wells Fargo and Warren Buffett were in the SAC command post underground at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska, becoming violence voyeurs? They were in position to watch the carnage in New York City and Washington, D.C. live. So I'll just leave that for the fat boy. Oh, pardon me, I meant the Oracle of Omaha. I think Oracle must be French for anus, because as far as I'm concerned, when you participate in making billions of dollars in pass-through certificates in World Trade 1 and 2, and you have the lack of foresight to be sitting squarely in the SAC command post with 300 of your Goldman Sachs banker buddies, apparently you don't understand the meaning of this phrase from the British academicians: hoisting oneself on one's own petard. So while you look that up, fat boy, I'll go back to answering the question with the other F word. So hopefully everybody's still out there grabbing a piece of celery if they don't like F words. The last F word is FADEC, F-A-D-E-C. Full authority digital engine control. Yeah, it's got such full authority that the helicopter that crashed in Bangor, Maine area last week had 2 FADECs. 2 of them. United 93, that had 2 FADECs, at least, maybe 4. United 175, American 11, American 77, Atamir 574, Kenya Airways 507, Speedbird 38, Turkish 1951, Egypt 990, TWA 800. These are just randomly off the top of my head. Air Africa 771, I think I said Turkish 1951, but what I failed to mention was the Sukhoi Superjet 100, not the one that crashed gear up in Iceland the other day because they forgot to put the gear down, which is the only way there's only one way that happens. They didn't put the landing gear down. Gee. And I offered to go demonstrate the airplanes for them over a year ago. And I think there's way too much of this cultural purity where people have too much pride. For instance, the Koreans that are alleged to have landed in San Francisco in an aircraft that was actually taken out of rotation 2 days prior. What I'm meaning by that is the tail number of the aircraft that the TV channel KTVU reported had these 4 pilots: something wrong, we too low, holy fook, bang, ding, ow! Well, anyway, the same TV channel that reported those names, which came from us on Thursday night before they reported them on Friday morning, they apparently didn't do the research on the logbook of that aircraft, because the tail number that was in the photograph of runway 28 left, which had been closed for a number of months due to reconstruction or construction activity. In other words, that was a junk airplane, and they got some crisis actors to pretend like it crashed. Now, how they got the film of the aircraft coming in on final is beyond me. I don't understand CGI. And how do you know I don't understand CGI? Because I'm not explaining what CGI is, which I'm guessing are computer-generated images. But I don't know that, and if you think I do know it, reverse this film, because somebody's doctoring our film. Doctor, my eyes have seen the years and the slow parade of fears without crying. You must help me understand. The last one was FBCA. This one was FADEC. Two more FADECs that prove these guys aren't good at covering their tracks. In July of 2011, or was it July of 2010, at Lethbridge, Alberta, a CF-18 flown by a guy whose name will come to me, Scott Bews. Is that right? B-E-W-S, I think is his last name. It crashed because somebody adjusted his FADEC when he was doing a low speed, high angle of attack flyby like this. And suddenly somebody caused his right engine to fail. And so you don't, even though some of you that never flew airplanes thinks it would be real easy to determine which engine failed, that's not true. And in his case, his right engine failed, so he got a yawing moment like this. And then when he did what every other fighter pilot in the world would do, which is take both throttles and go into afterburner, He went to afterburner, which caused it to rotate into the ground even faster. He's a very lucky young man that he was disciplined enough, well-trained enough, and humble enough to jettison the aircraft when he realized he couldn't fly it. And he couldn't have flown it because somebody took control of his right engine FADEC. Now, how do we know the FADEC was taking control? Well, we compare it to the crash on the 6th of April of no, not the 6th of April. Yeah, it was 6th of April of 2012. Somebody correct me if I misspeak. A two-seat Navy F-18 at Oceana on takeoff at a critical phase of flight had one engine fail. When you look at the crash, well, you don't see anything after the crash of the Canadian F-18. But right before it strikes the ground, you can see that one engine's an afterburner and one engine is selected in full power, and that's because of the variable geometry tail nozzles. Somebody else will have a better term for that, but the nozzles on the tail end of a jet engine, as you push the power up, they shrink to form the smallest aperture possible for all the hot air to go through, which gives you the most thrust. I say again, thrust. But when you select afterburner, they go wide open. And that's because you've just, I don't know if it's 4 or 8 times the thrust you're getting, but it's a lot. And it can't go through that. If you tried to cram afterburning power through an unexpanded nozzle, the engine would fail. That's my humble opinion. Never had an engine failure on an afterburning jet that I recall. And I'd certainly recall that this is an F-16 since they have exactly one engine. But David, I think I've answered your question. I've given you the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, the QRS-11 gyro chip, KU band communication, SMAC-sonic rocket, whatever you call it, rocket propellant explosive, the FBCA, which had the Ministry of Defense and Wells Fargo's Fatto from Omaha. Come and get it, fat boy. And also the FADEC. And I think the one that's the easiest to pick apart is the FADEC, because to a knowing eye, that's anybody who ever flew an afterburning jet. You can take one look at those crash scenes, the crash scene before the fact in Lethbridge and the crash scene where the remains of the Navy F-18 are sitting in an apartment house in Norfolk, Virginia area, Oceana Naval Air Station. It's real clear to anybody that both of these aircraft had a failure of a FADEC at a critical phase of flight, and there's nobody who can fly their way out of that. So David, that's the short answer. Did I give you enough to understand it?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, Field. And then the last one that I think we have to add to that list are the timing signals from the cesium fountain clock that was built at the National Physical Laboratories in Teddington in Middlesex. And then unbelievably, and I think this goes to the very core of treason against the Crown, the United Kingdom government under Blair, probably with a significant input from Cameron, privatized the custody and operation of the cesium clock at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington in Middlesex to Serco. Now, what that allows Serco to do is to set up very sophisticated man-in-the-middle attacks by interfering with the network time protocols of the red team and the blue team at an accident scene or a crime scene. And that comes back to this body count spread betting. And it's a bit technical, but I think I'm going to go through it because, first of all, I don't pretend that I understand it completely, because I don't have the kind of mind that can move as quickly over the field as a sophisticated and experienced bookie. But just to give you a flavor of the kind of characters attracted to that job, that is spread betting bookmaker, Google a guy called Peter Cruddas, C-R-U-D-D-A-S, the guy who stepped down as the treasurer of the Conservative Party after he was filmed by a sting from the BBC in selling access to David and Samantha. I think he said prime time is £250,000, 250 grand, I think he said. He's a Cockney. Middlesex is both a place and an experience, depending on your age and habits, Mensa Max. But Middlesex is actually a county in the United Kingdom. So coming back to the idea of disrupting network time protocols as part of a man-in-the-middle attack, and if you think the Brits don't know how to operate man-in-the-middle attacks, then Google Sir Francis Walsingham and Mary Queen of Scots, because he applied such an attack to set up Mary Queen of Scots to look like she wanted to kill her half-sister, and he succeeded in getting her head chopped off. And that was the 16th century. I don't think Sir Francis Walsingham invented man-in-the-middle attacks. I think they're much older than that. But anyway, the British intelligence services, or the Crown, are very good at setting up man-in-the-middle attacks. So back to Serco. So Serco has 40 or 50 contract towers, or we could call them remote towers, or virtual towers, plus an unknown number of mobile remote towers set up in various items of equipment for a continuity of government exercise on 911. In particular, they had the remote towers with the cesium clock fitted through Field Sister, then with the Small Business Administration, in the E4B Night Watch aircraft. Field, if you don't mind, just so I don't go bumbling on, just give a quick summary of what the function of the E4Bs is, as you understand it, and what the E4B over Washington was doing. Over to you.
They were voyeurs, voyeurism. That means watching something. I think I'm correct, and I'm going to defer to an octogenarian in the room with me, but aren't voyeurs often watching sexual activity?
It's my understanding.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Yes, and they were doing that at 425 Carroll Street in Vancouver in the headquarters office of AMEC. But go ahead, over to you.
Yeah, and AMEC is right next door to Starnet, and Starnet and AMEC and Al Haig and Bob Paulson and my sister Chris Marcy and Hillary Clinton and a bunch of these other yahoos are going to be boiling frogs. What I mean is they are going to be the frogs that are being boiled. I don't mean that they're going to be sticking whatever those are called. There's a name for those types of, they're amphibians. Well, amphibian this, you perverts. By the way, Professor George Lease is communicating somehow with somebody about the chat room, and I think he wants to let you and I know, David, that he's in here now. I don't see him, but apparently he thinks he's in the chat room. Maybe he is. But if anybody wants to communicate with him, I will answer your question in a minute. I see CCW just supported it with a picture. Here's how you can communicate with with Professor George Lees in Kelso, Scotland. I just stuck it up there. That E4B is a military upgrade of a Boeing 747-300. That's my opinion. And by the way, there's a couple of 747s that serve as Air Force One. Also, there's two of them. One of them was being built when I was, you can't make this stuff up, David, when I was at McConnell Air Force Base taking F-16 lessons, and no, I didn't read the book. And yes, I did graduate early. And no, I didn't fly all the flights because I had to get home because my daughter was expected any day and I wanted to be there for the joyous event. Having children is a joy. It's also a responsibility. That's why I make sure my children have good teachers, and that's why my daughter, who's 19, will learn how to burn rubber from Jack Mack, although she's probably been watching me since she was old enough to open her eyes, because I teach all my kids, you know, how to properly burn rubber without getting a ticket for demonstration driving or hurting your car. But enough about that. The E4B, there's four of them, this many, four. One of them was delivered to the Air Force as an E4A. I'm going to check how quickly John Prukup can Google. He's got a picture of an E4B. He's got an image of an E4B. But John Prukup, just to demonstrate that we're live and we're not necessarily always on the same page. In other words, you can correct me if I misspeak. I believe the first E4B delivered to the Air Force was delivered as an E4A, and I believe that aircraft was delivered in 1974 or 5. Please correct me. But the subsequent 3 aircraft were delivered as E4Bs, and the original E4A was reconfigured to E4B status up until when G.H.W. Bush, that's the first President Bush, and notice I didn't say anything about the Fourth Reich or Nazis. or about the 1989 call boys coming out of the boys' home in Lincoln, Nebraska, through Omaha, Nebraska, and through Washington, D.C. And these little boys from Nebraska were visiting the White House at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. If nothing else, what are you doing keeping young men awake at night when they should be sleeping so they get to be great big men who can scare the you-know-what out of a bunch of weasels in Washington, City of London, Vatican, and let me just throw in Bruges, Belgium, so you don't think you're getting a free ride. By the way, the Beatles not only gave me a ticket to ride, but in Psalm 94:16, God himself said, well, it's going to be quite a ride, but I'm trusting on you to run the race. And so far, we haven't dropped out. David, the E-4Bs, when they initially came on board in the Air Force, they were to replace EC-135s, which were flying looking glass missions. And looking glass, you might, in fact, rather than you might or I might, would somebody please remind all of us the relationship between Alice in Wonderland and looking glass, if any? I think there is one. But I'm too busy, too tired, and too old. And the reason I'm tired is we had a heck of a weekend last weekend with the Plum City Plunge, and it's taken me about 48 hours to recover. The E-4B is a flying command post. The Nazi, oh, I'm sorry, I slipped. President G.H.W. Bush canceled the program and sent the 4 E-4Bs to FEMA in 1989. Oh, how lovely, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Nope. They don't manage them, they deploy them. Where are some federal emergencies that could be deployed between now and October 22nd? Well, my money would be on Assumption Parish in Louisiana and the Boy Scout Jamboree, if it's still ongoing, in West Virginia. I don't think they're dumb enough to do the Boy Scout deal, but I think they are dumb enough to do the Assumption Parish deal. But let's just not criticize these people from FEMA and DHS and other people who sign up for good jobs with good pay and good retirement, not knowing what they're getting involved in. And by the way, we do have the home addresses of 3 of these agencies. Wonder what that means. People should really keep track of their databases. For instance, there was a hard drive that was copied at 2311 the evening of 14 October of 2008 from a kitchen table. That's all the hints you get. I mean, I'm not here to teach you, I'm here to scare you. Capiche? Okay, David, the looking glass, the idea of the E-4B when it was designed, when it was deployed, was to have a crew with as senior a commander as possible, which means whoever could get to the aircraft before it took off. And they would always hope to have a general officer or a Navy admiral on board, but whoever they could get, because time is the essence, they needed to get the flying command post off the ground, because they all 4 were stationed at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. That's spelled B-E-L-L-E-V-U-E. And they're all 4 at the same hangar, and they're not in the hangar. But at one end of the runway, there is the E-4B complex that has a lot of concrete and a couple of hangars. Makes a real easy target. So what you want to do is get those targets airborne. I think I used the term on Monday, launch the world. It's harder to take out 4 E-4Bs going 500 miles an hour in different directions at different altitudes than it is to take out all 4 of them when they're parked wingtip to wingtip, be they parked at Offutt, their home base, or be they parked at Andrews, which is their remote base now that FEMA has them. And on the morning of 9/11, and this will dazzle even some of our long-term agents. In fact, prepare to be dazzled. I'm taking a sip of coffee. David, not yet. Okay, what are the odds I know these call signs? Venus 77, Vivi 36, Trout 99, and Word, sometimes written Sword, 31. I'm going to say those again, and would somebody please Google them and see if anybody besides Abel Danger comes up. Venus, Victor, Echo, November, Uniform, Sierra, 77. Vivi, Victor, India, 36. word or sword. So whoever's doing this Googling, you can either put word or sword 31 plus Trout 99. Those 4 aircraft were airborne on the morning of 9/11. All of the 3, except for Trout 99, were E-4Bs. That means 75% of the E-4B fleet was up on the morning of 9/11, which leads me to conclude that they were 75% sure they were going to get it done. And what's get it done? Well, you have to know what the objective of the 9/11 attack was to understand they didn't get it done, because United 93 did not make its time on target. But that's for another day. So, where was the missing E-4B? Well, it wasn't missing at all. It was the Andrews Air Force Base on FEMA standby duty, because whenever FEMA is going to have a big operation, let's say they were going to kill so many people, they needed 2,000 coffin liners, which are stored in Georgia, which are sometimes reported to be FEMA caskets. They're not. They're just casket liners. And somebody, and I think it's a guy in Atlanta, Georgia, has some good images of how and why they put these casket liners in the ground where there's a high water table. It's to keep water from seeping into the wooden casket goes inside another. Do you know what that thing's called? It goes into some vault. Okay, so the ornate casket where you spend more money because you think your deceased loved one is going to feel more honored at $5,000 than at $1,200. Actually, the McConnells have a tradition, being cheap Scots, that we bury our dead in used Ziploc garbage bags. What's the difference? It's really no. In fact, if anybody wants to come to my funeral, bring an extra Ziploc garbage bag just in case my family has failed to prepare. But when
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you just remind people of where I want you to bury me?
Yeah, Freshkill Landfill, Hills 1 and 9. Do you think I don't remember stuff, David?
No, I just wanted to bring to attention, because and what was the motto of the little plaque that I want to set in the ground? You remember that?
Yeah, my daddy's not garbage.
Actually, that would be excellent to put beside the other motto, because si monumentum require circumspice. If you seek his monument, look around you. Because I'm hoping, not through hubris, that collectively, you and I and the team, we will solve the crime associated with the body parts buried at Fresh Kills. Over to you, Phil.
Yeah, good. Well, don't worry. I'm looking forward to your death, and I remember that way I can hog the radio show like you've been doing for the last 6 years. Because after you experience an untimely death at age 98 in a Morris Minor, I hope you live to 98. You're almost there now, it sounds like. But anyway, no, I don't look forward to anybody's death. On the other hand, to some way, God may, because He likes to be amongst His people. And when we're in heaven, I think we're getting closer. But I'll find out when I get there. And I had someone try to convince me that Jesus wasn't real. And you know what? I understand the academic argument. The only problem is, if you, David, or if Pastor Holt, or if this little picture I'm looking at of Matty McCann, if anybody told me that Jesus Christ isn't real, I'm going to have a little bit of a hesitation with that, because He's revealed Himself to me. However, to be fair with everyone, God is actually who revealed Himself to me. But when you start differentiating between God and Jesus, you got sort of a tough academic. And so I'm very happy to say God has revealed Himself to me this many times. And so therefore, it's not a matter of someone teaching me or my having faith. God Himself hit me over the head and said, look, here I am. What are you going to do for me? And He told me about Ephesians 5:11. And what it says in 5:11 is have nothing to do with the evil deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Or for our English friends, reprove them. So that's what I do. That's what you do. And David, you asked me a question, and I think I answered it. But if I didn't, ask me the question again, and I promise to be more laconic.
No, Field, I mean, it's the old story, of course. I never remember my questions, but you always do a superb job of answering them. So let's keep going with this extraordinary story of Serco. And I believe Professor Lees will really enjoy this notion that Serco, having taken custody of the cesium fountain clock built by the National Physical Laboratory at Teddington in Middlesex, was then in a position to set up man-in-the-middle attacks on the American chain of command, every aspect of the American chain of command, because simultaneously with having custody of that clock, which is the reference clock and considered to be the most accurate clock in the world, the timing signals from the Serco clock can then be injected into what is known as the matrix of algorithms associated with network timing protocols. And as I understand it, there's 15 stratum, technically I guess that should be strata, underneath the stratum 0 level, which is the one directly associated with the Serco clock. And if you're at stratum 2, you get your timing signals from stratum 1. If you're at stratum 15, you get your timing signals from stratum 14. So every intranet, that is internal network system operating for a government agency, the Department of Defense, the Ministry of Defense, the Department of Justice, NASA, NSA, etc., would have its own internal servers that are more or less close to stratum 0. And what's brilliant here, remember the cesium clock was invented by the Brits. So was packet switching. So was public key infrastructure. And that gave the early inventors and the early adopters the opportunity to persuade America and the American military to pick up these technologies whilst retaining covert control of their exploitation. So as Field points out, the Federal Bridge Certification Authority is basically a hub which allows the people who control the hub to monitor all of the communications between the member agencies, including the two banks, Wells Fargo and Citibank, and the one and only senior government in the United States, which is the state of Illinois, where, of course, the interloper in the White House was a former junior senator who voted, I believe, present at many important occasions when he might have been interested in expressing his personal opinion. But then again, puppets don't have personal opinions. They do exactly what they're told to do by the puppeteers. Going back to this network time protocols, what that meant was after Obama and the Chicago outfit had entrapped and extorted Boeing directors at the Hull House pedophile center in Chicago, which Abel Danger managed to get closed in January, I think it was 2011.
He's embarrassing everybody.
We got Boeing to move from Washington State, where Obama's grandmother worked on the production line in the Second World War, to Chicago, and the move and power of attorney associated with that move, because when the headquarters office of a major corporation is moved, that disrupts its internal communications, particularly the interface between the directors of the company and its management. And Boeing had two very interesting directors at the time of 9/11 for the purposes of this remote tower conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. One director, his name is John Shalikashvili, who's the son of Dmitry Shalikashvili, who was a major in the Waffen-SS that entered the United States by lying about his past through the British Operation Paperclip, which managed to get a very significant number of Nazi scientists and concentration camp operators and commanders into the United States to form the foundation of the CAI, which is not saying that every member of the CAI has his or her roots in the Gestapo tactics. But unfortunately, many of them will find that the techniques they practice are the ones invented, developed, and refined by British intelligence over centuries past. So John Shalikashvili was, prior to becoming a director of Boeing, and I think having a key role in masterminding or extorting the move from Washington State to Chicago, he had been the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was deployed by the treasonous Bill Clinton to China in 1997, where he gave a lecture to the People's Liberation Army University in Beijing with concluding remarks, which I quote from memory, something along the lines, "My president has instructed me to leave with you details of all of America's weapons programs in the interests of détente. And had there been any thinking military officers in the chain of command, when that president of the United States sent General John Shalikashvili in his capacity as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the People's Liberation Army in Beijing to make that transaction, both of them, preferably immediately on return of Shalikashvili from Beijing, should have been put before a military tribunal and, in my opinion, taken out and shot. Nothing personal. It's just in the existential interest of the United States to protect itself against this kind of bullshit. The second director of Boeing was a man by the name of John Biggs, who is, I believe, named in Field McConnell's court case filed in North Dakota Supreme Court, if that's the right term.
No, it's not.
On the first,
David, can I correct you?
Go ahead.
Your effluence. The name of the court is the United States District Court, District of North Dakota. It's one federal courthouse is the Quentin Burdick Federal Courthouse, and there's another federal courthouse right alongside it. But I've got pictures of the presidential limo with the seals upside down out in front of those courthouses. When I filed the paperwork you're alluding to, which was Hawks Cafe versus the Global Guardians, and I filed that, it's called Civil Case 3:07-CV-49. The preceding piece of legal toilet paper I gave to the Department of Justice, and that's exactly what type of paper they need. I had the courtesy of giving them unused toilet paper. They can do what they want with theirs. But Civil Case 3:07-CV-24 was filed on 27 February of 2007. And for some of the phony baloney people that like the legal system, which means you're a pervert, in my humble opinion, because the Department of Injustice is not there to create justice, it's to protect the bankers and the attorneys. Having said that, there are people who say, well, gee, Field, you're wasting your time filing these lawsuits. No, I'm not. Had I moved my civil case 3:07-CV-49, had I moved that and served it in 07, it would still be in Hellerstein's court in the Southeast District of New York today. Now, I filed it in North Dakota, but anything that touches on 9/11 moves to Southeast District of New York. Judge Hellerstein, who is the taffy-pulling partner of James Comey, who thinks he's going to be the FBI director if Barry Swatero Punahou 79 remains in office much longer. But we have given him a deadline. Barry Swatero Punahou 79 has a deadline to clear out by 22 October of 2013. And do you think that'll have an effect? Well, I don't know. People didn't think my civil case filed on February 27th of 07 would have an effect, and they're dead wrong. 4 days after I filed it, 4 working days, no, less than 4 working days. But I filed it on 27 February of '07. On the 3rd of March of '07, Boeing Aircraft Corporation exposed to the world from their mouthpiece in London, England, that the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot did indeed exist, and that within 2 years, every airliner in the world would be equipped with similar technology, which, using Boeing's words verbatim, since sometime in 2009, every airliner in the world can be remotely controlled, and unless you want to get into a taffy-pulling Bullingdon quality argument, that means that every airliner in the world is a potential drone. David, I don't think we've been wasting our time. I think we've been very patiently building our foundation, and the foundation of Barry Soetoro 79 and Hillary Clinton is rattling and chattering and shifting and falling apart so fast. I'm sure neither of them can believe it. And does it give me any personal satisfaction to see Hillary Clinton and Barry Soetoro Punahou 79 to go down over the bungled Benghazi deal? And we've explained what happened in Benghazi time and time again, and yet some people just don't get it. But these perverts, and I mean as in perverters of justice, Hillary Clinton and Barry Soetoro Punahou 79 are the 2 biggest enemies of America that I'm aware of, and I've been doing this 15 hours a day for the last 7 years. And David, you've probably been doing it more hours a day. I know you've been doing it for more years because you started this project in '01 or '02, and I came on board in '06, but it wasn't because I was asleep in the back of the vegetable truck. On the morning of 12 September of 2001, there were 3 human faces on the front page of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Fargo Forum. Those 3 male faces, and it doesn't matter if they're male, female, confused, or a 3-legged billy goat, but the 3 phases, and of course you don't control this in 2013, what was published in Fargo the day after 9/11 in 2001, Osama bin Laden, George Bush, and me. So let's see where they want to go with this. Obviously, we're not getting tired. Isaiah 40:31 says we can hang in there longer than the enemies of God. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So we talked about John Shalikashvili, the son of a Waffen-SS Major, Dmitry, who entered the country illegally under the British-run Operation Paperclip as the director of Boeing, who helped to extort the move from Washington State to Chicago, where it would fall under the influence of the Chicago outfit led by Obama. Well, no, correction, not led by, because the guy's a puppet. But obviously, from a strategic point of view, if they wanted to overthrow the government of the United States using an airborne attack, they needed to get control of the world's largest manufacturer of military and civilian aircraft. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Boeing's move was extorted. What intrigues me is it appears that the commissioning of the Boeing headquarters computer systems, which would have, I believe, been in contact with the remote towers installed on all Boeing aircraft around the world, was to be completed on the morning of September the 11th, 2001, just the same as the commissioning of the US Navy Command Center in the Pentagon by AMEC. And just to run the clock back a little bit, AMEC's Canadian headquarters that was running the project to upgrade the Pentagon and the diesel systems in building number 7, some people say it was operated out of Toronto, which is wrong. In fact, it was operated out of 425 Carroll Street in Vancouver, which office of AMEC were in the floors above the offices of Starnet. And Starnet, backed by the RCMP Pension Fund and the Vancouver Police Pension Fund, had a very interesting model, business model, that we could call the remote towers pig farm model. What do I mean by that? Well, Some people say that the murders at the pig farm started in 1999 and then began to accelerate in 1996.
I just thought of something very
If that
important.
were true, it is highly likely that the mobile radio technology developed by McDonnell Detweiler to interface between the RCMP and the Vancouver police and the 911 dispatch service was being used to try and create the perfect crime. That is to say, hypothetically, let's say on the Picton family's land there was a tower that had been designed with the support electronics and encryption systems to monitor the communications between the Vancouver police, the RCMP, and the dispatch, and watch to see if there was any indication that any of those three organizations was beginning to understand the process that was going on at the pig farm, which was a core part of the StarNet business model. Now, StarNet was launched in 1995 or 96, it's not quite clear which, as an interactive internet sadomasochistic pedophile entrapment service, on the basis that if you could get a child in the company of adults being abused in some horrific manner, you could actually interactively give instructions to the adults on what they should be doing to the child to maximize the satisfaction, let's say, of a member of the Bullingdon Club in London, such as former Minister for War, John Profumo, who resigned in disgrace in 1963 after lying about his relationship with Christine Keeler, and retired to Toynbee Hall, which is the predecessor organization of Hull House in Chicago, founded in 1889, to clean toilet bowls. Now, Toynbee Hall was founded in 1884 to take the children from the red light district habitués, incumbents and clients in Whitechapel and teach them how to hold a knife and fork and act as servants ultimately for the aristocracy and the very rich. British intelligence, probably being as intelligent then as they are now, realized that if they could educate these children through a process that I suppose today we might call pedophile grooming, they would become extremely powerful agents to be taken into service at a rich man or rich woman's estate and provide services to their employers, which in front of witnesses, and 1884, I suppose there were cameras around. I think the camera was invented in 1840, something like that. Anyway, suffice to say, there would be means of collecting evidence of the interaction between the very poor and the very rich and the very young and the very old that would allow the custodian of that evidence to take complete control over the future of the most powerful families in the world. And people often say, oh, the Rothschilds are nasty and evil. I know a few very wealthy people, and I know some extremely poor people. I don't differentiate between either of them, and nor do I differentiate between the children who are abused while they're young and they grow up not knowing right from wrong until some revelation or role model walks into their life if they're lucky. So I think from an Abel Danger's point of view, and I think on the whole we don't do that, we don't prejudge the guilt or innocence of these people, and that's not our role. But what I think we have established now without fear of contradiction is that the technique of pedophile entrapment and pedophile grooming is extraordinarily ancient, and it's evolved and been perfected by British intelligence, and in particular the livery companies of the City of London, to the point where they can get a British company, and this is really staggering, a private British company to handle the 4-minute warning for a nuclear attack for the United Kingdom. Just think about what that means in terms of body counting. That means if, as I believe we are pretty well convinced, that Serco is controlled by the Octopus, and the Octopus decides that they want a body count for an attack on central London of 100,000 dead, plus or minus 1,000. Serco has the ability to inject a timing signal from the cesium clock into a bomb placed at Buckingham Palace, known as, or modified with, a dial-a-yield device. And the dial-a-yield device, just like it says, it dials in the gap between the ignition sent to incendiary ingredients inside the bomb and the detonation signal sent to the detonators in the explosive part of the bomb. If you send the ignition device early into the incendiary component of the bomb, as Field says, the temperature will go up to 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is half the temperature of the surface of the sun, turning the explosive components into a plasma, meaning they won't explode. So what you'll get is a whiz-bang effect. That is, there'll be a certain pressure associated with the expanded gases, not of a particularly percussive nature, to do physical damage to an object, provided you agree that vaporization is not physical damage. If, however, you send the detonation pulse or detonation signal to detonators that trigger the explosive component of a dial-a-yield bomb, it's going to blow up, sending fragments all over the place, but disperse the incendiary material so it doesn't ignite. So by varying the timing between those two components, you can have all fireworks, is whiz-bang effect, which I think we tended to see at the Boston bombing, or all percussion, meaning the fragments, the nails inside the pressure cooker bomb fly around, causing various kinds of injuries. So what Serco can do, since it controls the cesium clock, it can send very precise timing signals to a dial-a-yield device in downtown London or downtown Washington or downtown Chicago, and literally go to the international spread betting markets dominated by people like Peter Cradas and say, place your bets on the body count. So the insider, the bookmaker, through the remote towers and the timing signal and the patent pools created by Hillary Clinton through, let's say, the Strangler's Suite, can basically, with a remote tower in the vicinity, monitor the preparations in advance for security at the event and determine or control the ratio of the red team and the blue team at the crime scene. And the red team go into a crime scene under the joint automated booking system developed by Nortel for the Octopus to increase the body count, and the blue team goes into the crime scene to decrease the body count. And what the bookmaker does, it alternates control over the internal communication of the red team and the blue team for given periods. Hypothetically, on 9/11, I think the continuity of government exercise started with the Bin Laden red team being sent into various crime scenes with a 15-minute opportunity to use perfectly synchronized communications among themselves to set up an attack with, let's say, the end goal as far as the fire department of New York is concerned of 350 plus or minus 50 dead firefighters. So this is earlier in the day, and as Field, I think, has discussed, maybe just I could give my voice a break. Could you just go through the implications of the 30-hour stand down of Amalgam Go for the future attack on the United States of America? Field, over to you.
Sure I can, but first I'm going to show everyone what an egg timer looks like, and I'm going to demonstrate its use. I'm setting my egg timer for 3 minutes, just like I've often suggested David Hawkins do. So while he's resting his voice for 3 minutes, I will just encourage David by letting him know that somehow I found out that JonBenet Ramsey's father wishes for her issue to stay open. In other words, JonBenet Ramsey wants Abel Danger to keep talking about JonBenet Ramsey, and I'm not making this up. And if I was making it up, I wouldn't tell you because I wouldn't make it up. In the real world, it has come to me that JonBenet Ramsey wants his daughter's death on Christmas of '96 not to be forgotten. So if anybody out there, if you're still within the sound of my voice, if anybody out there within the sound of my voice has contact details for JonBenet Ramsey, I'll offer right now to meet him anywhere, any time of the day in the 48 lower states at my expense. And if I were to meet him face to face and convince him, like I convinced Mary Tillman, that we care about her son, Pat Tillman, who is the subject of this Google debate, everybody Google along with me. Pat Tillman plus 23 star fraggers. Well, we're not done with JonBenet Ramsey, and I don't have her picture in front of me, but I have this. Take a look at that. That's Maddie McCann. And we're not going to give up on her. See, it says right there, don't give up on me. Don't give up on me, baby. We're still worth one more try. I know we let the last one by. We're not going to let any of them by. You people that go around harming children and harming innocents, and I mean that in both sense of both words. Innocence spelled INNOCENTS. Innocent Pakistanis, innocent Libyans, innocent Egyptians, Yemenis, innocent people in Afghanistan and Iraq, and also the innocence of youth. You're destroying innocence when you have these young people, these young children of God, serially abused and then discarded. And a term I've come up with, David, is discardable units of pleasure. There's a cruise ship, there's a ship on a western bay and it serves. No, there's a port on a western bay and it serves 1,000 ships a day. There's a place where the sailors play and think about their homes. That's Brandy. I goofed up the lyrics, but if some dangerette reminds me to put that in chapter 22, I will. Somewhere in the San Francisco area, there's a cruise ship that goes out occasionally, and when it goes out, it has a bunch of old perverts, males for sure, females maybe, I don't know. It has a bunch of young children. There's an exchange of cash between the old male perverts and whoever runs the ship. When the ship comes back into the port, the perversions of the old males have been temporarily satisfied, and some of the children are no longer on the ship. If these people think that God is not going to get them, they've got their head stuck right up their rectum. And what's our purpose at Abel Danger? Well, for Professor George in Kelso, Scotland, it's not our purpose and it's not within our power to educate 7 billion people who do not want to be educated. It is our purpose, and it is easily, very easily, we don't even have to sweat or think hard, it's within our power to scare, say, the 3,000 evil parties. And how do I know today that we're getting through to them? Well, Courtney Banks, if anybody knows who I'm talking about with Courtney Banks, she's a redhead at nsaww.org at 1950 Old Gallows Road in Vienna, Virginia. She has been foolish enough to reply to us. And this is like a giant game of global guacamole. you stick your head up and Abel Danger will knock your head off. So if I were Courtney Banks, I would cease to communicate, because just like the other little sissies at NSAWW, Christine Marcy, Lynn Sherlock, and J.M. Cohen. When I say J.M. Cohen, I'm not referring to Leonard Cohen, who says everybody knows the game is fixed. Well, some people thought that Jimmy Savile was the fixer because he had a TV show in gullible England. I didn't say gay old England. That's the New England. They're gayer than a $3 bill, apparently. Take a look at the leadership, or dare I say misleadership. But there was a show in the 70s, maybe the 80s, that was something to the effect of Jimmy will fix it. Well, Jimmy can go pound sand. God will fix it if it needs fixing. And I will stipulate out of court that the United States of America and most of the other countries in the world richly need fixing. I believe we're part of the process, and if God blesses our efforts, we will succeed, and if God opposes our efforts, we will fail. And the choice is not ours. Our choice, speaking for Abel Danger globally, is simply whether to participate in an effort to defeat the enemies of God. David, am I overstating our purpose?
No, I think that's great, Field. And you mentioned little JonBenet Ramsey, and I have said in the past, I'm not sure that I'm ready to change my mind yet, that although it was a little girl of 6 years old, this may be the most important murder of the 20th century, because it does reveal, I believe, the modus operandi, or modus operandus, or whatever it is, of the octopus that was not invented by the late General Alexander Haig, but to a certain extent perfected, i.e. the idea of setting up spread betting opportunities with body counts of victims of either natural or man-made disasters. So in order to entice large institutions, that is banks, insurance companies, and pension funds, into this deadly game, they need to be persuaded that they're doing the right thing in betting on what is a plausible outcome. Now, in the normal course of events, prior to, let's say, Sandy Hook, if you went around the spread betting community in London, which is where it's at, and said, we know a bookmaker who's going to open a book on under and over spreads on the number of children to be killed in a lone gunman attack in Connecticut earlier this year. No, it wasn't early. I think it was the 14th of December of last year. Is that right, Field? Over to you.
Yeah, it was Friday, the 14th of December, and I just want to make sure that your diction, I say again, diction, and my hearing are compatible. Did you say the lone gunmen, as in Gunmen, or the lone gunman, Gunman? Because the mainstream media keeps pushing this drivel that it's a lone gunman, Gunman, that did Aurora, Cudahy, Sandy Hook, Boston, and would have done Atlanta had we not stopped them. If anybody in the world even wants to consider the possibility that God uses humble doorknobs to do some of his work, some of his light work, like feather dusting, if anybody wants to see why Janet Napolitano is no longer hanging around DHS, and by the way, there's I think 3 or 4 other senior offices at DHS that are currently unfilled and will remain unfilled, because just like Leonard Cohen says, everybody knows the game is fixed. What these people are finding out in increasing numbers and at exponentially increasing speed is God's the guy who sets the results, and the odds makers and the big setters and the spread betters and the bedwetters can all go pound sand, because you don't have any power left at all except to lie to each other. And what was your question, David? Because I didn't answer it, but I have the answer. So refresh my mind as to what your question was.
About lone gunmen.
Yeah. Well, the Google search that ended Janet Napolitano's girthliness is simply this: DHS, Delta Hotel Sierra, plus DMORT 5, Delta Mike Oscar Romeo Tango space capital V, DMORT 5, plus Hotel Sierra Echo Echo Papa, plus crisis actors, and wait for this, there's a sixth one coming that you're not expecting, plus Vision Box, plus Field McConnell. The first one to get the results of that Google search up will be invited to have a slow dance with Agent Chips wearing Craig Peterson's purple hat at the next gathering of Abel Danger, which could be in Canton, Texas in October, or it could be in Plum City sometime when it's warm out. Over to you, David. Let's see how fast they Google that one with my name in it.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So if you go back to the Sandy Hook, and then I'm just going to bounce around between the JonBenet Ramsey situation. There was a lone gunman exercise taking place in Bridgeport. And I used to go, well, I lived at Ridgefield. No, I lived at Westport. I worked in Ridgefield in artificial intelligence, and I used to visit Bridgeport and watch the highlight. It's quite fun. I remember that. But anyway, in Bridgeport, there was a lone gunman exercise where I imagine it would be fairly easy from a simulation point of view to persuade the local union and the pension funds to place bets on either side of a result of a simulation. And I suppose there are rules that can be written with a maestro or referee that determines how many children a lone gunman might kill at an elementary school in Bridgeport. So perhaps in good faith, I really got to think hard about that, the Connecticut state employees could perhaps bet under or over in terms of the simulation and their ability to decrease the number of children killed, or certain elements of that pension fund might be very interested in seeing if they could crack the local security and increase the number of children killed. And I suppose that intervention would be what weaponry the lone gunman would be bringing to the party, if that's the right word, and how rapidly the first response systems, including 911 calls and closed circuit televisions, could deliver a SWAT team to take this individual out. So I suppose in good faith, I could imagine union pension funds are betting either side or under and over a body count of 20 for the purposes of a simulation. Now, once those bets are placed, I suppose, what I'm really saying is the die is cast, because if Serco and Signal Systems of British Columbia can then insert a remote tower or a virtual tower to monitor all of the communications between the local police, the ambulance services, and the dispatcher, they can create the basis of a man-in-the-middle attack on the red team, which is setting up the attack, and the blue team, which is defending the attack, the red team trying to increase casualties, the blue team trying to decrease casualties, and then invite the international financial community and the hundreds of institutions that have pooled their assets in the carbon closure project in London to place their bets either side of a casualty rate or body count that will be announced at, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning of the 14th, Friday the 14th of December 2012. However, it would be very easy, depending on where you place your remote towers, to insert a different school into the simulated exercise, which is what they appear to do. So let's say they had a remote tower at Bridgeport monitoring the simulation, and they had a remote tower picking up the communications between the various participants in another exercise, a covert exercise at Newtown, Connecticut, the site of the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Then as far as the public concerned watching the television, if they're switching through the network time protocols, the signal from Newton into the Bridgeport transmission, or the signals from Bridgeport into the Newtown transmission, they can be interviewing actors who think they're at a simulation and splicing that with perhaps one or two members of the security forces, or let's say the Wayne Carvers of the world, the state medical examiner, so that the actors and the felons at the two crime scene get very confused about what they're talking about. They're talking about a real event, or they're talking about a simulated event. Meanwhile, in the international betting wars, people are taking a position and they're actually spot fixing, that is declaring, we think there will be 20 children killed and 6 adults killed. And if they hit it on the nose with those numbers, they could be getting millions of dollars of payoff funded by the bookmaker from what is known as the vigorish. Now, why would the vigorish and the bookmaker be so important in terms of manipulating public perceptions? Well, let me give you one example where you'd make a great deal of money with this. The shares in Remington, correct me if I'm wrong, Field, but I believe the AR-15, allegedly Bushmaster rifle used at Newton, is made by a company called Remington. Is that correct?
I think AR-15s are built by a whole lot of people, and I'll defer to Jack Mack, who is our resident armorer. In fact, if DHS was going to visit his location, which will remain nameless, Jack Mack himself could hold DHS off, just as the two SEALs, Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty, held off Dr. Morsey's crisis actors, who, when the SEALs unexpectedly started defending the compound, the Egyptian cowards, pardon the redundancy, threw their hands in the air and said in Egyptian Arabic, "Dr. Morsey sent us! Dr. Morsey sent us!" right before they got wiped out by withering automatic fire from Tyrone Wood, plural, Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. And if anybody out there thinks that the Benghazi story is going away before I do, you apparently either don't believe me or you haven't been listening very long. I would take great delight in shoving Benghazi right up the tailpipes of Thunder Thighs and Barry Swatero 79. I would not feel like I owed them the courtesy of a personal lubricant. And if there was some sandpaper or fish hooks applied to the leading edge of the Benghazi story, I'd shove just as hard. These people apparently have no respect for human life. Why do I say that? Well, if anybody out there has a way of figuring out how many drone deaths have been caused on innocents abroad, and when it comes to abroad and a field, I know of what I speak. Surely one of our aviation assets, preferably in the Palmdale area of California, which reminds me of a song. Pardon this musical interlude, David, there's a purpose for it. Take all the water that you need to wash your hands and cool your feet. Leave the bucket full for others. Thank you kindly, Desert Pete. Okay, that was a song, 1958, I believe was the year, could have been 60. It's Kingston Trio. It's a Christian song. It's about take all the water you need. Make sure you leave the bucket full for others. What that means is the water of life, take it because it'll be replenished, but make sure you don't deny it to others. In fact, we're commanded in the Great Commission to share the water of life, and that's what we're doing, but we do it in a way that six members of my former church don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. They want to somehow judge me for effectively combating net-centric pedophilia. And if you think 134 nation pedophile, you got the money, you got the kid business is not offensive to God, then that's where you and I separate, partner. As for me, I will continue to do what it is David and I are doing. I hope that we do get put in touch with JonBenet Ramsey's father. I was very encouraged today to hear from someone that he is responding to our writing and he's encouraged by what we're doing. I know Mary Tillman was encouraged by what we're doing, and what we're doing is we're not giving up on Maddie McCann, we're not giving up on Benghazi, we're not giving up on Pat Tillman, we're not giving up on 9/11, Murrah Building, Branch Davidian, Deepwater Horizon, and they just keep making it easier and easier because when I die, I don't know if I'll be remembered or if I'm remembered, what those memories will entail. But if I could pick a memory, I'd love to be associated with the two words run together, Google bait. Because as sure as I'm sitting here, and am I sitting here? I don't know. Do you trust your eyeballs? Nope, I'm standing here. And as sure as I'm standing here, I think we got rid of Janet Napolitano, and I think we're going to drain the swamp. So, David, do you think I overstate our impact?
No, I think you understated actually, Phil, because we're going to change everything. When you were talking about disrespecting the bodies or people or lives, I was reminded of the opening salvo of chapter 1, book 1, Hunter's Wingman. I'll just read from that. How airline pilot David Hunter, eventually he morphed into you, or Chips, bought a beer for Hamish Watson, who knew something about virtual news, weapons of mass destruction, and drug trafficking, and snuff film networks operated for global clients of the Montreal Mafia. How Hunter dances with Jukebox, a foggy dew beauty who had selected F4 as her third and last tune, the one Hunter didn't get to hear, a tune chosen from a DOA, that's Dead on Arrival album, Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. A hint why Hunter might wake up New Year's Day wondering if a former Vancouver coroner, a Haitian voodoo priest, and a million Tamoy anarchists used radar sat out of Richmond, British Columbia, or Gatineau, Quebec, to track bodies into secure waste disposal sites such as a pig farm in Port Coquitlam, not far from the pub, or the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island. And you see, what we've discovered, Field, of course, is the MO, the signature of disrespecting bodies at the Fresh Kills landfill, is identical to the disrespect shown to the bodies in the mud piles out at the Picton family pig farm, because it's the same group of conspirators responsible for both sets of murders. In the case of the Fresh Kills, perhaps body bits from up to 3,000 bodies. And in the case of the Picton pig farm, well, very interesting, when Willie Picton was asked or being interviewed or interrogated about his association with the crime, he said, I got careless, I got to 49 and I wanted 50. Something that's always struck me, Field, about these kind of crimes is the fascination with the numbers. So now, fast forward to the present, we've discovered that at 425 Carroll Street in Vancouver, between 1996 and the present, there was launched an online gaming, interactive S&M and snuff film and money laundering service, operated by Starnet Communications in the same headquarters building as AMEC. So it's no coincidence that AMEC was theoretically upgrading the diesel systems in building number 7, the Salomon Smith Barney building. And upgrading the US Navy Command Center in the Pentagon, and in both cases, AMEC got the contract to take the evidence away. So you've got a corrupt senior executive service organization in the United States headed by your sister, setting up a Canadian company with the remote towers to support killing of Canadians predominantly at the pig farm and killing of Americans predominantly at the US Navy Command Center in the Pentagon and the Twin Towers, and simultaneously managing them so that the resources available for killing people were also available for removing the evidence that might lead back to the original conspirators. So our original analysis field, remember spot, spread, well, no, the spread didn't exist because I'd never heard of spread betting until about, I suppose, 4 or 5 or 6 months ago. But the spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil paradigm applies at all of these crimes, where the spot, originally when I came up with that word, was meant to refer to spotting the assets, the criminal and the victim assets moving through a crime scene. Now I understand that spot must have dropped into my brain in association with the phrase spot fixing, where within a spread, let's say 350 firefighters plus or minus 50, and you take bets from under bettors and over bettors until they're balanced, and then the bettor, the bookmaker, collects the vigorish to pay off the killers. You can, within the spread, you can do spot fixing, where you offer people an opportunity to bet on precisely the second or the number of bodies that are going to be killed. In the case of a soccer match in England, as I understand it, you might have a spread bet, which is the number of goals difference between the two teams. So you go under and over that, and that's spread betting. But you might, without altering the result, invite a corrupt player. 3 minutes. Okay, over to you, Phil.
Hey, it worked. I was just kidding around, David. I've been sitting here looking like an idiot for a while, and I'll get right back to your spread betting, spot fixing, and vig dealing. But you just quoted the very first chapter of the very first book that we wrote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well, you're not going to believe this, because that girl that I was pursuing in chapter 1 of book 1, she was a flight attendant for a national airline of what nation? Do you recall off the top of your head?
Greece.
Very good. She was from Greece. What I have in my hand here, now we're going from the first chapter of the first book to the last or current chapter of the last book. In chapter 22, our blonde Grecian goddess, and I've got her picture already, you're going to love it, code word diversity. If anybody today has seen an image of a female with a t-shirt that says diversity on it, please put it up in the chat room. If not, I'll try to find it. But this is like Bookends. And of course, Bookends was by Simon and Garfunkel. Old friends sit on the park bench like bookends. A newspaper blows through the grass, falls at the old shoes of the old men. Old friends, summer companions, the old men. Anyway, enough about that. Our current chapter has this blonde Grecian goddess whose Abel Danger name, of course, is Skinny Dipper. But her real Greek name is Plomari Ouzo. Thank you. Who is that master of technology? Yes, Field and host were extremely gracious. Diversity was our Plum City tour guide. Yeah, she's Greek, she says, but her hair and her eyes tell me that maybe it was a U.S. serviceman with blonde hair and captivating eyes that might have shared some ouzo with Skinny Dipper's mama. Who's your mama? I'm wearing my Mac Daddy hat if I seem out of character. Which reminds me, Craig, I'm taking good care of your hat and I'm keeping my DNA off it, so if they blow my head off, there won't be any DNA on your purple hat for our next mission in Plum City. But isn't it remarkable that for whatever reason, someone who doesn't know how to write would write about a Greek flight attendant, and 275 chapters later, and that's coming up on 6 years later, I run into a woman named Athena whose father has a Greek restaurant where I had spinach and cheese pie, and there will be a test on the menu selection. And I walk out the door with a bottle of ouzo, and I don't drink ouzo, as you can tell. There's two things you can tell from this image right here, and this gentleman right here can attest to this in person next time you're here. In fact, you know what? Would you mind signing your name to this thing right now in front of a camera? I'll sign mine first. No, I'll sign mine second, because in Matthew 19:30 it says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. What we're going to see here is authenticity and accountability. That's Clyde Holt. Pastor Clyde Holt is signing his name that as of 1531 on the 24th of July of 2013, that particular canister with that particular bottle of ouzo is unopened. And when he gets done signing his name, I'll countersign it, meaning I'll sign across his, so there'll be an X of signatures. And anybody coming to Plum City anytime can see this container. Thank you, Clyde. It's going to remain full until we have some gathering of Abel danger agents. Let me get the camera down so you can witness this. And if you think this is a waste of time, I wouldn't blame you. But I can tell you, it's not a waste of time. I don't write very neatly, and this is an uneven surface. I'm going to put the day's date, 7/24/13. I'm going to put the comment full. There's some of you out there that might add a couple of words. The time now on my Walmart $10 chronometer is 15:32 CDT. Okay, so there it sits. The next time we have 10 or more Abel danger people in Plum City, I don't care if it's next week or at my funeral, we'll crack that bottle open and we'll at least see what it smells like. And nobody who doesn't like ouzo will be asked to have any. And I might have some just to be a gracious host, but I'll tell you what I won't have is I will not have more than one eensy beensy thimbleful, because it has a very fragrant and robust smell. But I was told by a couple of Greek people yesterday that there's people who do consume alcohol that for some strange reason, if they have, and the strange reason probably isn't all that strange. Generally, they're these young people today. I don't understand this, but maybe it's always been that way. Apparently, young people today like to drink beer ad nauseum, and then at the end of their 3 or 4 hour beer drinking episode, they like to top it off with shots. If I want to get real stupid real fast, I'll sign up for a public education and I'll start again in first grade at age 63. I don't think being stupid is something to be proud of. And I'm not saying that everybody that takes a shot of this and a shot of that at closing time is stupid, but it didn't work for me in 1973, and I don't think it's going to work for young people today. So this, I would like to think, this is interesting, I would like to think that we will never open this bottle of ouzo until I'm dead. And that way you guys will have my signature, Clyde's signature, that it was unopened, and it's remained unopened from 1534 on the 24th of July until sometime in the future, which could be an Abel danger gathering or my funeral. Take your pick. It won't be my decision. David, how are we doing so far?
We're doing grand, and you were talking about drink and binging, and just reminded me at Cambridge of the King Street Run, which participated in. I think I got to the end, and there it is. Student would try to complete the run in the quickest time. It was banned in 1964 by Cambridge University proctors, but was restarted. Successful participants had to have a pint of beer in each of 8 pubs and close to either end of King Street. Ladies were allowed halves or shorts. Drinks could not be set up in advance, and if you met a friend, you were honor bound to have a chat with them. At the time, the run was not a race, and entrants had 2 hours to complete the run. So yeah, people, when they're young, they do silly things, and tragically, when they're old, they do equally silly things. So age is not a basically criterion, Bill. But back to the vermin who are doing this killing, and the ones who discarded human remains disrespectfully out at the Picton pig farm and at Freshkills landfill. So backing up, I think now we've got a very clear idea of key companies involved in spread betting and spot fixing for dead bodies. And Serco obviously has a very important role, and Signal Systems, which is part of the McLean group, has a very important role. But let's just stay with Serco. So now, in their wisdom, the bureaucrats in the government of the United States of America, having given Serco the opportunity to mount man-in-the-middle attacks on 911 through the remote towers or contract towers networks, they have added to that indignity by giving Serco the opportunity and responsibility for running the United States Patent Office. And I believe Serco has now processed the 3rd or the 2nd millionth patent applied for in the United States. Now, let me just point out why that's not a very smart thing to do. Field, you went through some of the technologies associated with the Strangler suite, and we have now added to that with the remote towers and network time protocol. That would mean that the patent community of lawyers, most of whom are sharks, would have an opportunity, for example, to look at all the patent applications associated with uninterruptible autopilots or dialer yield bombs, where, for example, you could take the incendiary systems inside the fuselage of a Boeing narrow-bodied or wide-bodied aircraft and either burn off the roof or literally vaporize the whole thing. Now, where did we see recently, question for you, Field, a Boeing with the roof burnt off but the wings undamaged? Over to you.
Yeah, I know where that was. I got to put the camera on myself. That was in a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco when an Asiana Flight 214 landed allegedly and cartwheeled allegedly and skidded to a halt allegedly while not damaging the chin. Here, let's see how my chin looks. Very rare, but I shaved today. Why? I don't know. I'm starting to look like George Clooney, I guess. Anyway, this airplane came in allegedly, knocked its empennage off allegedly on the seawall of 28 left. Then as it went this way, allegedly, it fell to the ground allegedly. It rotated, is that counterclockwise allegedly? And while still going fast enough to create lift, allegedly, the right wing got enough of a breeze to lift it up, continue spinning around on its chin, then it resettled again, allegedly. And then people carrying their luggage came out of the fuselage, allegedly. Nobody else may have picked up on that. Oh, Jack Mac, excuse me, I almost exposed the source. I've never exposed a source. Agent Hammer McCheese has all sorts of photos that prove what we think, or what we were told by the ever brilliant KVTU, or is it KTUV? Well, the people that reported the pilots' names on Friday morning, approximately 8 to 10 hours after I published them in Chapter 21, or Chapter 20, excuse me. Chapter 20, off the top of my head, went up around 0200 on Friday morning, whatever Friday that would have been before Friday the 19th, so it was Friday the 12th. By noon Friday the 12th, that TV channel, KTVU, was retracting the names of those pilots that they had. In fact, would somebody please not, in fact, everybody doesn't need to do it. So Craig, and if Craig, if you're not here, CCW will have it, but Craig, do you think you could find the report from KTVU where this woman looks right in the camera and says, we've scooped the names of these 4 Korean pilots. They are Something Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Holy Fook, and Bang Ding Ow. Well, 2 hours later, the guy who is I guess he would be the biggest personality at the station, he repeated her apology. She apologized first. She's the woman that reported it, and she very appropriately apologized, humbly, and I think she was serious. I mean, I believe she was serious. So did the guy. He took credit for their mistake. He said, even though we checked it out with an intern from NTSB, which has no interns, he says, even though we checked it out with a third party, we still should have read the news to ourselves, so that using Clyde as my foil, or maybe I'll be Clyde's foil, I would read, Clyde, I got some names here from the NTSB. Do these sound kosher to you? Something Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Holy Fook, Bang Ding Ow. Now, see, if they had just spoken those words alpha-phonetically and orally, I don't mean orally like an oral cavity, I mean orally like you can hear it. They themselves, the woman, the man, the NTSB intern that never existed, like the lone gunman, they probably would have said, well, we're going to report these names after somebody else is a guinea pig, because these things don't smell like real good names to me. And this is, some people might say, well, Field, why would you publish those names knowing they're wrong? Here it comes. Because it's equally wrong, if not more wrong, to allow illegally modified aircraft to proliferate in U.S. airspace after September of 2008, when I filed civil case 1:08-1600 parentheses RMC. I'm going to speak clearly and slowly. I'll try to enunciate as well as I can. The 3 ALPA attorneys who perpetrated a fraud upon Judge Rosemary M. Collier's court. Their names in order of appearance are, what was his name? Plunkett. Rob Plunkett, Plunkett. Suzanne, Suzanne, I think, Kalfus, Kalfus. James Johnson. Those 3 attorneys, I'm alleging, perpetrated a fraud upon the court that has allowed any aviation fatalities that have happened since September of 2008 to occur utilizing a weapon called the Strangler's suite of illegal modifications. David, I rest my case. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So we've got this situation now with the San Francisco incident, where Serco and Signal Systems, run by Jason McLean out of British Columbia, are able to deploy remote towers or virtual towers in the area around San Francisco Airport and take archived footage and splice it in with real footage to create a script or a storyline. Now, how many personalities and scripts would these people have access to? Well, Jamie Gorelick, your sister's boss in the Department of Justice, when she was Deputy Attorney General and your sister was Assistant Deputy Attorney General, is now the director of Amazon, which owns the Internet Movie Database, which has 5+ million personalities and 2.5+ million scripts. So Jamie Gorelick, who's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, as is your sister, and the rest of these cretins, they have a very significant resource to go to if they want to put together or stage an event at the San Francisco airport. Plenty of impecunious actors who can be hired to create a perceptual manipulation of the public. Lots of archive footage of plane crashes, etc., etc. And all they need is a coordinating remote tower somewhere in the vicinity of San Francisco airport, which monitors the police, the fire, the ambulance services, and the 911 dispatch, and make sure that there's sufficient confusion being spread around that no one sees that it's a staged event. And then it can be used to manipulate public perceptions about, for example, the amount of training pilots have in these super-modern aircraft. And I understand that the Boeing 777 was Boeing's first fly-by-wire aircraft. Now, we talked about the Strangler suite and the ability to operate FADEC, full authority digital engine control, and the FCKU band, and the gyroscope, and so on. So that plane could have been hacked, and I believe was hacked, by a remote tower supplied and operated by Serco in an arrangement with Signal Systems, with Justin McLean, to get into the avionics of an aircraft landing at the San Francisco or a nearby airport, or maybe somewhere else around the world, and put a story together where they're slicing and dicing the timeline. Now, I'm not an expert accident investigator with an aircraft, and maybe you want appropriate technology or terms here, Phil, but I see the video that shows the landing, showing a plane that turns over on its side and then crashes. But when I look at the wreckage, if it's turned over on its side, presumably, you tell me, but the lift disappears, in which case the nose goes down and the wings would be sheared off or damaged in some way. But when you look at the wreckage, the wings are intact, unblemished, if you will. So obviously, the place where the fuel was, which is the fuel tanks in the wings, it wasn't fuel burning, but the top of the fuselage, where I understand the wiring and the computers of the fly-by-wire systems are burnt. And to my untrained eye, I think that the temperature of whatever it was that burned off the roof was probably 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit, i.e. they were using Smexonic insulator / incendiary material to vaporize any evidence of the remote tower perception modification of the American public. If you go out to Lac-Mégantic and scroll around the images of the remote-controlled Caboose, you'll see that the timeline for that horrific accident, and of course it wasn't an accident, it was murder, in Quebec, there are many things wrong with it that would be a characteristic of a hack by a remote tower system in the area of Nantes, where the train started to move, and Lac-Mégantic, where the train stopped. Now, what we're supposed to believe is the engineer of the locomotive, the MMA locomotive, he shut down his locomotive, left it on a slope, which apparently was policy or practice at the time, not in its siding, got out and put the handbrakes on up to 11 wagons and went to the hotel where he would have met with his relief engineer the following morning when they continued with whatever the journey schedule for that particular train was. Then it looks like the Serco / Signal Systems remote tower operation was booted up, and someone sent a message to the dispatcher for MMA that there was a fire in the locomotive. Now, the dispatcher gets a message. Whether the dispatcher knows he's getting a spurious message or not, he then dispatches 2 firefighters from the area together with a representative from MMA to the locomotive to put out the fire. They put out the fire, and again, I believe through a remote tower man in the middle attack, a message arrives at the dispatcher to say the fire is put out. You can call the engineer in the hotel and tell him he doesn't need to come out to the site. So the engineer in the hotel thinks everything's okay. He stays in bed. The train then starts to move. And the simulation shows something very interesting. We're told at this stage that the train has at least 11 wagons with the handbrakes on. The train starts to move. Now, we've got 2 possibilities. One is the handbrakes were on, and I don't know if any of the listeners have driven a car with the handbrake on. I certainly have, because I'm very absent-minded, until something smells and I realize that my wheels are getting very, very hot. And then if I'm lucky, well, so far I have been, I stop and I realize what an idiot I am. And I release the handbrake, continue on my way. But if you get anywhere near a wheel that's had the handbrake left on, it's exceedingly hot. Now, these trains are supposed to go for, was it 8 kilometers with the handbrakes on 11 wagons, in which case, simple conservation of energy, or dissipation of heat, I would think all of the wheels associated with those locked-on handbrakes would be glowing red, if not white hot, and the whole thing would have seized, the bearings would have seized, and it would have come off the rails way before the little town. But no, the simulation shows the train approaches the town, gets to a bend, a relative bend, there's a bright flash, and then the 4 or 5 locomotives with the automatic remote control caboose behind the first locomotive continue on and stop, I don't know, I'm just guessing, perhaps 100 meters or 100 yards away from the scene of the action. Now, here's a hypothesis, and it's 1:52, so there's not a lot of time left to explore it. But I suggest there was a remote tower concealed inside that caboose. And the operator of the remote tower was now opening up the spread bets on the body count and mobilizing red team, blue team. Well, they would have been mobilized well in advance and taking bets on the number of dead. And the red team would have been deployed to increase the body count, let's say, above 20, but not to go beyond 30, let's say, or they wouldn't get any money. And the blue team would have been told to get the body count below 30, but not below 20, or they would get no money. So you've got 2 compromised and corrupted teams deployed by the bookmaker, the General Haig's Octopus, 4 men and 4 women, including Jason McLean, that are being rewarded for narrowing the body count so it falls within the spread. So the pension funds on over and under the spread don't transfer huge amounts of money, but the bookmaker collects a 15% vigorish from the bets placed. And the vigorish, historically since 1984, is placed in the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund by your sister, Phil, Christine Marcy, and Eric Holder since 1984. So there we are, 1:54, 6 minutes to go. Anything else you want to talk about? Over to you.
Yeah, I hope we can hold off until October 22nd to have both Boo Boo and Thunder Thighs removed. But I guess that's up to God, his timing. And if you want to read about his timing, It's in Proverbs 21:31 where it says, "The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests on the Lord." So if your Lord is money, good luck. If your Lord is oppressing children, good luck. If your Lord is pedophile activity, good luck. If your Lord is pornographic, which I've been accused of being from people who read this stuff and don't get it, good luck. And as far as that last group of people, I'd say this. Bob Dylan from Hibbing, Minnesota, admonished people who listened to his lyrics, so don't criticize what you don't understand, because the times they are a-changin'. Yeah, there was a time in America when little kids were safe. There was a time in America when lawyers and bankers were looked up to. There was a time in America where the military people had confidence in their leaders. There was a time in America when a Secretary of Defense would not be so foolish as to say, and I'm talking about Panhead, we don't take our orders from the United States of America. We take our orders from European interest. Hey, Panhead. I don't know, in fact, maybe you know, David. David, do you know if there's any statute of limitations on treason? I suspect there's not. We have a couple of minutes to go, and then the new agent we have, whose name is Skinny Dipper, but her given name is Plomara Uzo, this thing's going to stay right here in this office for a long, long time, and it'll probably be back in the back room. In fact, if anybody from this point forward, if anybody ever says in the chat room, Pastor Clyde, could you make Field grab the Uzo bottle out of the closet? And if he asks me to go get it, I'll go get it. Just like right now, I'm going to leave it with you, David, for a minute while I go put it away. And I'm going to be putting it away in a box that has a bunch of elderberry juice in it. I'll be right back, David, so you can start saying your goodbyes.
Okay, Phil, just a little for then. There's a picture of the 777 at San Francisco Airport, and notice the tail's been knocked off. And contrary to what you might expect from seeing the video side on, where that you're looking at in the video has turned through 90 degrees, so the wings are in the vertical plane, in which case you'd expect the thing to sort of, I don't know, somersault or nosedive and have the wings ripped off. The fuselage and the systems that we're looking at here in this picture, the wings are intact, practically undamaged. But the roof, from just behind the cockpit to the rear of the plane, is literally burnt off. So what was the material? Where was it placed that would create this incredibly intense fire? And at what stage did it start? Because if it was burning at those kind of temperatures, no one would have escaped from that aircraft. So the script and the personalities that were required to be stitched together with these phony timelines and the remote towers and the cesium clock from Serco has been carefully calibrated to give the public a perception, but it's got nothing to do with a professional crime scene investigation. So it's very satisfying to think that since professional crime scene investigations in the United States no longer exists, that Abel Danger is applying its collective resources to cloud-centric crime scene investigation. The problem for the bad guys is they've got a cloud and they're stuck in it, but we can come in and out of the cloud at will inside one of Field's OODA loops, where I really don't want to get inside that too often, certainly if I'm an enemy. And it's 1:59 and it's time to go. So God bless, if I'm allowed to say that, and look forward to the next performance. Over to you, Phil.
Okay, and you certainly are allowed to say that. And I was just going to ask Craig who JC was. I know Jesus Christ is my JC, but that was an error on his part. He's corrected it. The wingtips don't look very bent to me. And I did bend a wingtip on an F-16 on my very first flight. Actually, not a wingtip, but a horizontal stabilator. And it was curled up. We dragged it on the runway at Salina, Kansas, because of some unstable wing rock on probably my first landing. I don't know. Neither I nor my instructor knew we'd hit the ground because we continued to fly for another 8 or 10 landings. Then we flew back to McConnell Air Force Base and landed again. And then when we landed and parked the airplane, the crew chief said, "Hey, did you guys know you struck the tail on the ground?" We said, "No, couldn't feel a thing, didn't fly differently." So we flew around Salina Airport. Oops, the red button's up. 3, 2, 1, and push it. I've got to get ready, David. So goodbye to you, and you're certainly encouraged to say God bless you, and I'd say God bless everyone. And as soon as I get the push it command, you know I'm just the guy with my finger on the trigger. So I'm awaiting a push it command from a good authoritative source, and this agony will end. Lots of Boeing stuff. Look at the right wingtip. Yeah, it looks like the picture's been doctored. Now, Jack Mack, you want to get a confirm on that they've changed the picture? To do for a veteran, that's not politics, it's personal. Yeah, and a veteran never gives up his oath. So I've got the 3, 2, 1, but I don't have to push it. So Mensa, are you going to, well, first of all, now we're going to need to start over again. We need a red button, we need a 3, 2, 1, and a push it, or we're going to be here forever until the cows come home. I think the cows are coming home, so somebody stick up a red button, and I like that sign, Ginger. Pit crime scene multiple. Post-production crime scene. Yeah, I think that all you need to know about Asiana 214 is something wrong. It's 402, so if I don't get a red button, a 3, 2, 1, push it, I'm going to create my own red button and push it. So 3, 2, 1, thank you. If I get to push it,